Chapter 663. She stood in the tower and looked to the north, her slender hands clasped in front of her chest. A breeze slipped in from the window and rolled up her hair as black as midnight. Diamond-like tears shimmered on her soft cheeks. He silently read a poem that described the beauty of the lady. This book was a collection he borrowed from the mayor of Maple City. Keyes stood on the top floor of the stern and looked in the direction of the protruding headland. The desert elf walked over quietly. "The paper tower is ready, but—" Brock pondered for a moment and continued. "Will it be a problem to only let Jason support the sacred samurai? I always feel that those ancient monsters are not so easy to deal with." "Don't worry, he can at least save the lives of a few sacred samurai, and it can be considered a good karma. Ramsey is not like the Ash world and the Island world, which are cared for by the god. That is the human residence of Hurones, and it is not suitable for us to appear." As he spoke, the lighthouse on the protruding headland in the distance lit up with a dazzling light, illuminating the night sky. Bathed in this light at such a close distance, it was like snow under the warm sun. The fighting strength of the Raven men and their bodies were quickly melting away. The sacred samurai, on the other hand, were the exact opposite. Their fatigue faded, and their injuries began to heal on their own. The seriously injured walked around the gates of hell and returned to the world of the living. The lightly injured were as good as new. The only problem at the moment was that the blue soul threads connected to the sacred samurai by Soul Search had not dissipated. The sacred samurai controlled by Soul Search still had not regained control of their bodies. "Damn you, Hieronymus. The backup plan you left behind really makes me feel uncomfortable," Soul Search cursed in a low voice, changing to an old woman's voice. "Since that's the case, I have no choice but to cut off all means of retreat." Soul Search stretched out the hand that did not grow threads and played with the threads like playing a pipa. All of a sudden, the sacred samurai under his control began to tremble all over. Their mouths were also constantly vomiting pieces of their shattered internal organs. It was true that the light of the lighthouse contained divine power left behind by the god of valor, but there was a limit to it. While healing the paladins whose internal organs were damaged, the beam of light was unable to maintain its suppression on the invading enemies. "Go help the Avatar, help him topple that obelisk." Soul Search, who had just caught his breath, immediately issued an order to the remaining Raven men as he looked at the Avatar that had turned into a giant and was forcefully pushing the obelisk on the ground. Tribulation's voice scraped through the monster's eardrums like a razor, effectively urging them to get up and carry out the order. Soul Search was already putting his life on the line. He didn't want to treat the paladins this way. After all, they were Hurones warriors in the human world. Killing or severely injuring them might incur the wrath of the Lightning Bearer and cause him to send down his saint Avatar. Other than the monarch, Soul Search and the other generals and wives were all unable to face a true god. Therefore, he had to ensure that the Emperor could be resurrected, and it would be best if he could be resurrected immediately. Otherwise, Soul Search, who had put all his eggs in one basket, would be buried in the wrath of the god again. If that was the case, the dreams of the ancient rulers of the Ramsey Empire would have to wait for many years before they could make a comeback. "I'm sorry." Just as Soul Search was concentrating on controlling the paladin puppets in his hands, a murmur suddenly came from behind him. Before he could react, the forged steel horse-slaying sword cut through his right shoulder blade. "What?" Although the forged steel horse-slaying sword was plain and simple, in the eyes of the weapon master Neru, who had already pursued higher goals, it was just a weapon that was heavy enough, sturdy enough, and sharp enough to receive such an evaluation. The person who used it had injected extraordinary power into the long sword. Favored by the most fundamental will of reverence in the multiverse, Jason skillfully manipulated the power of reverence that was much more reserved and superior to ordinary holy powers, slashing at Soul Search's arm with reverence of evil vanquishing slash. Unlike the slash of evil slash of ordinary paladins, The power of kindness in the kindness of evil was purer than holy power. Although it was not mixed with any god's punishing will, it could repel all other forms of power. Soul power was no exception. There was no doubt that when Jensen's long sword fell, Soul Search's arm was cut in half from his body. The thousands of soul strands in his body did not play any role in stopping the attack, and were all cut in half. The general had completely lost control of the paladins. After the successful attack, Jensen did not stop. He stepped forward and slammed into Soul Search with his shoulder, knocking him far away. Then, Jensen held the hilt of his sword with both hands and pierced Soul Search's fallen arm with the forged steel horse-slaying sword from above. The surging holy power of kindness gushed out from the long sword and instantly annihilated all the vitality of the arm. The strange mouth in the palm only had time to wail before it disappeared with a puff of green smoke. "Don't let those monsters break the seal." Dalton, who was lying on the ground, watched Jensen defeat the general like flowing water. His eyes widened in surprise at first, then he immediately realized something and quickly reminded the powerful senior in front of him. Although he did not know which god Jensen served, he could still feel a thick holy power lingering around him. Jensen was also a paladin. So even if Dalton did not know Jensen, he still chose to believe in this stranger. It may be too late. Jensen glanced at Dalton, but he did not immediately rush in the direction of the obelisk. Instead, he walked over and helped the paladin captain of Hieronymus up. "Gather all the paladins and the priests on duty in the temple and retreat from the protrusion. Instead of staying here and dying in vain, the sword of the lightning bearer should be used to protect the civilians of Soft Maple City who have no ability to resist evil." Bang! Before his voice trailed off, the sound of heavy objects collapsing to the ground resounded throughout the temple square. The obelisk standing in the center of the square had turned into ruins. Many of the Raven men who did not have time to run far, their broken bodies also fell under the rubble. The stars in the sky were covered by the turbulent rolling clouds. The cold wind swept the top of the protrusion, gradually growing stronger and whistling. Looking at the gradually extinguishing light on the lighthouse and his subordinates who were barely standing around with their swords, Dalton finally cast his gaze in the direction of Soft Maple City, which was faintly lit. "Everyone, go to the stable and help the priest on duty out. Take the holy statue and ignore the other valuables. We will immediately go to Soft Maple City to establish a defensive position." Chapter 664. The wind howled, sweeping up the sand and stones in the sky and smashing them on their backs. The sacred warriors could only lead their horses and move against the wind with difficulty. The storm mixed with dust found every gap in their armor and clothes, mixing with their sweat into smelly mud. The air was humid and hot, making it difficult for the sweat on their bodies to evaporate. Everyone felt as if they were carrying a swamp on their backs. "That guy's appearance is really grand." Standing on the top balcony of the stern, Keyes commented as he looked at the protruding headland. At this moment, the harbor of Soft Maple City was in a mess. Even if they were docked, the ships could still be overturned by the hurricane at any time. All the captains were doing their best to save their belongings. Only Keyes' ship remained as still as a mountain. That was because half of the ship was made up of leviathan creatures. The behemoth had already extended its anchor-like tentacles and was tightly connected to the seabed. Several guards standing guard on the deck hurriedly dispersed and drew their bows. This was because they noticed several tall figures emerging from the swirling dust and walking onto the trestle. They were all wrapped in cloaks. Under the strong wind, it looked like giant wings flapping. "It's Mr. Neru and Fazak." After seeing the appearance of the people, the crew put down their bows. "Why are you still using bows in such a strong wind? Go and change into flintlocks." After walking onto the ship, Neru glanced at the guards on duty and criticized them for their unprofessional choice of weapons. Then, he walked into the stern. He was carrying a sack in his hand and blood was dripping out of it. The sailors who had to wash the deck the next day had a headache when they saw this. Inside the sack was none other than the dead leopard man. After learning that Nehru killed a general in the paper tower, Keyes asked him to bring the corpse back to the ship. This was the first time they had obtained a general's corpse. It was just right for the three scholars, half-lich Sneyd, which Dr. Paru, and engineer Shea to study and understand the other party's background. Therefore, Leopard Man's headless corpse was directly sent to a laboratory at the bottom of the stern. The three experts had been waiting here for a long time. They had made all kinds of preparations. As soon as the Leopard Man's body was placed on the dissection table, these people started to get busy in an orderly manner. Nalu couldn't help but curl his lips as he looked at them. He had to ask Blue for some food to warm his stomach. His muscles are similar to those of felines. They are very powerful when chewing, and they are rich in striated muscles. Peru tore off a small piece of muscle from the other's thigh and put it into his mouth. He quickly gave his own intuitive description. His thigh muscles have also mutated and merged with the coccygeal skeletal muscles. His running and jumping ability will be greatly improved. Let me take a look at his chest expander. The Demolik was holding a magic staff and kept chanting all kinds of curse-dispelling spells. Not only was he responsible for discovering the possible signs of magic modification on the corpse, but he also had to provide magic protection for the other two companions. However, after carefully examining every part of the Leopard Man's headless corpse, Snyder didn't find any magic traps. Unlike the other two researchers, Shea's examination mostly required the assistance of some precision instruments. Therefore, he rarely stayed by the Leopard Man's side. Every once in a while, he would take some samples from the corpse and then take the samples to the side. Through the instruments, he would carefully observe and further explore the experiment. His fur, bones, and muscle tissue have all been modified. He has a strong resistance to cutting, piercing, and blunt force injuries. But after more in-depth observation, I found that this Leopard Man actually has the same internal organs, nerves, blood vessels, and fire resistance as the fire lizard's infant form, the fire snake. Moreover, his body has two sets of energy supply systems. One is like an ordinary creature, relying on normal food to replenish its energy. The other, through drinking large amounts of flammable liquid, it can be used as. Saying this, Shea took out the Leopard Man's heart from his chest and directly placed it on the flame of the alcohol burner. But what Snyder and Peru didn't expect was that the heart was completely fine. There were no signs of burning at all. So, I boldly speculate that this Leopard Man is very likely a creature directly modified by the fire snake. By changing his appearance, at the cost of his racial characteristics, he was given the ability to move far beyond that of an adult fire lizard. This also explains why there are tissues similar to the upper body of the fire snake between his waist and abdomen. And according to what Nalu said, after being shot twice at close range by the shotgun, this guy actually didn't have any burn marks around his wounds. 3 researchers from different fields, in less than half an hourglass, disassembled the Leopard Man's corpse into specimens in the form of spare parts. They figured out the Leopard Man's habits, physiological structure, and possible weaknesses. And finally, they came to a very unified conclusion. The Emperor who created the Leopard Man had a very rich knowledge of mechanical systems, biological systems, and practical experience in biological modification. That guy probably also modified himself. Removing the wheat from the chaff is not a skill that a beginner can have. Based on what we learned about the Crow Man race and the Leopard Man now, we can be sure that if the Emperor let go of his hands and feet and had enough resources, he would soon be able to create an army of modified creatures that completely belonged to him. After listening to the three's report, Keyes nodded. He vaguely felt that the Emperor's craftsmanship was somewhat familiar, as if he had seen similar products in other places. When he saw the desert elf Brock sitting next to him, Keyes suddenly realized. So, the modified creatures created by the Emperor are somewhat similar to the blazing shadow beast that the desert elf Salem tribe created when they restored the ancient soul-binding mage's experimental subjects in the Ashes world? Did the Emperor of the Ramsey world go to the Ashes world before? In fact, Key's guess was very accurate. Before changing his name, the Emperor did travel to many worlds in order to gain more knowledge, and the Ashes world was one of them. There, he not only learned about soul power and modified creatures from the soul-binding mages, but also learned how to use the vitality of other creatures to cast powerful spells. And the latter was the reason why the gods and the Ramsey people could only seal him and not completely destroy him. Chapter 665. Before the obelisk was removed, you would never know what was buried under it. What the hell is this? Seeing that there was a gold-rimmed toilet buried under the collapsed obelisk, the incarnation of calamity couldn't help but exclaim in surprise. This toilet bowl was so strange that even if the obelisk carved out of a whole piece of bluestone was turned into rubble, there was not even a scratch on it. The incarnation knocked on the toilet bowl with a puppet staff, making a muffled dong-dong sound. He wanted to use magic to blow it up, but after trying several spells, it did not work. Sometimes fate is a joke, and sometimes life forces people to want to crawl into the sewers. Looking at the line of inscriptions on the toilet bowl lid, the incarnation gritted his teeth, turned into a python, and crawled into the toilet bowl. With a wave of dizziness and the sound of the water tank being drained, the incarnation was directly washed down the pipe by the rapid flow of water. He didn't know how much time had passed, but when he felt light again, he was already in an underground river. He crawled to the shore, spat out the shrunken puppet staff from his mouth, and changed back to his original appearance. This underground river seemed to have been artificially repaired. The walls and dome were very smooth, as if a layer of mortar had been applied. Whoosh! The eyes of the puppet staff lit up with an inextinguishable flame, and the incarnation saw what the Emperor's tomb looked like. On the dome, there was a painting of each of the monsters created by the Emperor. There were many cages inlaid on the walls, and there seemed to be some stone-like objects enshrined in them. The dung stones of the Raven Man. Approaching a cage, the incarnation was just about to reach out to take a look at the objects enshrined in it, but he suddenly saw the engraved words next to the cage. The corners of his mouth twitched, and he took 2 steps forward to look at another cage. Who did this? The burial place of the Emperor has been transformed into a dung stone museum. The incarnation roared angrily, and his voice traveled far along the underground river. Incarnation, my loyal servant. Amidst the echoes, this tribulation warrior suddenly heard a faint call, and woke up abruptly. Emperor! Where are you? I want to wake you up again and punish the filthy Ramsey world. Eat what? This is a trap set up by Gar Dazzlinggold. Only by eating everything you see can you reach my real tomb and lift the seal. Hearing the name Gar Dazzlinggold, the incarnation finally understood that this was all a prank of the dwarf master god. However, although he understood, Gar Dazzlinggold was indeed a great divine power. With the strength of his incarnation, there was no way he could dispel the traps set by the other party. He could only eat according to the Emperor's request. The moment he swallowed the last piece of feces, everything around him seemed to have turned into a mosaic, and then fell to the ground. The illusory space created by the dwarf master god had disappeared completely. Only then did the clone realize that he was in an empty space. 2 lantern-like eyes were hanging in front of him. Emperor! This calamity general knelt on the ground and kowtowed to his master and master, as if prostrating himself on the ground. The inextinguishable flames gradually rose from the top of his staff, illuminating the entire space. The Emperor stood in front of the incarnation. The daunting behemoth had 4 thick legs, somewhat similar to the Megalosaurus, but the difference was that he had 3 claw-like toes on the soles of his feet. He had a huge tail covered with scales, and a mane of emerald-green flames spread from the tip of his tail to the top of his head. A pair of large and tough wings stretched out from his back that seemed to be able to blot out the sky and cover the earth. He was wearing a set of black half-body plate armor, and the surface of his body that was not covered by the plate armor had a dark green hue. Even if he did not stand up straight, he was still 16 feet tall, and the tusks growing out of his lower jaw were about to pierce through the ceiling. But at this moment this ancient emperor was bound by a few chains and was unable to move. "You came a little late, I'm a little disappointed." Seeing the incarnation arrive, the emperor nodded and said, The incarnation did not argue and lowered his head in frustration. "I can't argue with that, my ever-strict master." The emperor tilted his head slightly, as if looking at a bland failed dish on his table. "You're right, you really have nothing to say. But, even if you came a little late, it's not good. Now, come and help me treat my wounds." The incarnation nodded. He had already seen the wounds caused by the chains on the emperor's body. As a calamity general who was most proficient in the field of transformation and nature magic, the incarnation had also been the emperor's imperial physician before, so he was no stranger to treatment. However, he did not expect that the emperor called him over this time, not to let him do the treatment, but just to need some materials. When the incarnation came close, a huge palm with 4 fingers suddenly grabbed his body, and black flames immediately burned fiercely from his body. He opened his mouth wide, but he could not make a sound. Green light flowed out of the incarnation's facial features like flowing water, snaking toward the emperor's bloody mouth. "I admire your hard work very much, so I named you Incarnation to store precious life energy." Looking at the acolyte who had been burnt to ashes, the emperor gave a mournful eulogy for him. His body, which had become shriveled due to the erosion of time, became full again in a short span of a few breaths. Shaking his shoulders violently, one of the emperor's arms broke free, and then he tore apart the iron chains that bound him one by one. Taking steps that he had not taken for thousands of years, the emperor straightened his chest and walked to the center of the hall. "I am the emperor. My revenge will sweep through the whole of Ramsey. You rascals will die without a doubt." His voice was like rumbling thunder. The emperor straightened his arms, and a black flame began to burn in the tomb that had trapped him for thousands of years. The rocks were burned and melted, and the protruding protrusion directly turned into a mountain of flames. Billowing smoke rose from the top of the mountain. Keyes, who was overlooking the scene from the harbor of Soft Maple City, could not help but frown and cover his nose. He was mentally prepared for the emperor to break out of the cocoon. However, he did not expect that guy to make a terrible stench. It was a bit of an eyesore. Chapter 666. Who knows where those monsters came from? Maybe it's the emperor's witchcraft. Dig a hole, bury some soil, count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and the monsters will be born from the soil. The people in the North Wind Tavern were laughing and joking, but there were only a few people who could maintain such an optimistic state of mind. Most of the people gathered here were merchant ship owners and sailors who were looking forward to the day. They were always hoping that the frozen sea would thaw. As long as the sea surface melted a little, they would raise their sails, lower their oars, and sail away. 2 weeks had passed since the day the emperor woke up. The first tip-off that Soft Maple City received was provided by a group of Saint Samurai who had retreated from the mountain. By the time the mayor ordered the city gate to be closed, the emperor had already broken out with a stench. At first, although people were in a panic and many rich people wanted to escape with their wealth, the emperor did not take any action. But since a week ago, all kinds of monsters began to emerge from the mountain and constantly attacked Soft Maple City. Not only that, the emperor used some kind of witchcraft to freeze the sea within the protrusion in a few hourglasses. One had to know that even in the dead of winter, the seawater would not freeze so easily. As a result, the people trapped in the city were worried. The poor were worried about where to find winter clothes and firewood, The rich were worried about whether they could keep their accumulated wealth. At the same time, everyone was worried about whether they would be able to keep their lives this time. Even the city guards who were originally responsible for guarding the city had caused trouble several times. Thanks to the mercenaries hired by the mayor and the Saint Samurai troops who had withdrawn from the mountain, they jointly stationed themselves in the barracks of the city guards to suppress them. Only then did the barracks not lead to a disaster. The only good news for now was that for tavern owners like Old Bobby, they no longer had to listen to complaints like, "Why is the beer sour?" or "Why is the liquor not strong enough?" In the cold weather, it was good to have a sip of wine. But those who could still come to the tavern were not only rich but also did not care about what they drank. "You have to tell me the truth. Can you let me and my family out of the city tonight? The price is negotiable." The person who spoke was dressed no differently from an ordinary drinker. However, he looked a little stout. He didn't look like someone who played with knives or a businessman who often traveled far. Moreover, although his hands were fiddling with a horn cup, he didn't drink a single mouthful of the dark, honey wine that was inside it. "Would you like a jellyfish with rock sugar?" Weather, who was sitting opposite him, asked with a smile. "I remember you like this. Eating something can also help you think." After that, he asked Old Bobby if the North Wind Tavern served this dish. The result was obvious. He only got a bowl of thick soup made from several vegetables and meat, and the boss looked at him like he was an idiot. "Weather, listen up." The mayor, who came out to meet one of the bandits in disguise, lowered his voice and threatened, "Although Soft Maple City is about to fall, I haven't stepped down yet. I still have more than one army at my disposal. You definitely don't want me to send them to invite you back. At that time, we won't be so easy to talk to." He ignored the mayor's threat. Weather didn't even use a spoon. He just held the bowl and drank the soup. He wiped his mouth with his sleeve, then looked at the mayor with the same gaze that Old Bobby looked at him just now. "Are you an idiot? There must be a way out of the city. We also sent some people out of the city a few days ago. But what was the result? My brothers in the Gang Fork camp told me that they saw the monsters that attacked Soft Maple City. Some of the monsters were wearing the clothes of those who left the city." Gang Fork Camp was the name of the Soft Maple City's defense force. The reason why the mayor used to hire mercenaries out of his own pocket was that the Soft Maple City's defense force had been mixed in with various monsters. Successive mayors were very worried about their loyalty. Therefore, when Weather said that he got the information from Gang Fork Camp, the mayor was not surprised at all. "I'm different from those rich men." The mayor lowered his voice, leaned forward, and said to Weather, "I still have a sum of money that can be paid to those mercenaries. If you want, you can also go with us to compete for the position of the bandit leader in other cities. To tell you the truth, Soft Maple City doesn't have much food left now. Moreover, I've sent pigeons to the nearby cities and dwarves for help, and the reply I got was to hold on for at least 10 more days." After hearing this, Weather's remaining one eye couldn't help but squint. This was his habit when he was thinking seriously. Originally, he thought that the fat mayor was a coward, so he was ready to abandon the city and flee as soon as the battle started. But after listening to him talk about the details of Soft Maple City, Weather was a little shocked. Holding on for 10 days, according to the current strength of the monsters, it might be possible. But at least, the people who were fighting had to be able to fill their stomach. Moreover, even if they tightened their stomachs and risked their lives to defend Soft Maple City for 10 days, what if the nearby cities or dwarves didn't send troops over? Or, they didn't send enough troops and couldn't lift the siege of the monsters? After all, the Emperor's base camp was right next to Soft Maple City. This city was the first to bear the brunt, and was destined to be the place where the battle would be the most tragic. Weather had traveled extensively in his early years, and he had seen the lands that had suffered the most damage during the ancient war. Some of the lands were barren, and some were even in good condition. Thousands of years had passed, and some places were still filled with chaotic magic. Ordinary people were doomed to die if they stepped into those places. "Listen, kid," the mayor continued to persuade him. "I know you have a sum of money in your hands. It's the salary that the almighty Mr. Keys gave you in advance. But when there's not a single grain left in this city, where can you go to spend the money? Also, have you seen Mr. Keys in the past few days? How do you know if he has already sneaked away?" The mayor's words were quite persuasive. In fact, part of the reason why he decided to leave Soft Maple City was because he hadn't seen Keys in the past few days. The previous bombardment of the official residence and defense of the paper tower allowed him to see Keys's powerful strength. If a person with so many advanced weapons and capable subordinates were to escape, then he definitely had no confidence in defeating the emperor. He was just an ordinary mayor, so there was no need for him to stay here. That was why he secretly came out tonight to meet with Weather. He wanted to find a way out from the head of the thieves. Chapter 667. A shadowy silvery light slowly appeared on the ground. Dawn sprinkled fiery red feathers of light on the walled city. The sun stroked the dawn, and golden specks of light shone on the battlements. The fog gradually shrank into the arms of the protruding headland. The horn signaled the end of the night watch. The mercenary leader shaded his eyes and narrowed his eyes as he looked down. He muttered twice in annoyance and turned his head to look at the paladin captain who was waiting to change shift. Dalton nodded to him. "It's time to change shifts," the mercenary leader shouted to his brothers behind him. Although he was unwilling to admit it, the mercenary leader actually admired Dalton. Because those paladins and his mercenaries had similar characteristics, compared to the Sissy Steelfork Battalion, these people were qualified warriors. They were no longer naive. For the past few days, including the Fat Mayor and the Steel Fork Battalion's officers and above, had come to persuade the mercenary leader like a merry-go-round. They desperately stated that the end result of guarding this city would be certain death, so it was better to escape. But this veteran general, after seeing the attire of the monsters wandering around Soft Maple City, had long been mentally prepared for a complete wipeout. Hoping for a fluke is the faster way to die on the battlefield. Only warriors who are not afraid of death and dare to fight to the end are qualified to continue to live. Of course, he also made some other preparations. For example, he had the historian who wrote the mercenary group's chronicles pack their luggage early and find 3 of the city's best fast horses. As long as the war reached the point of no return, the historian would gallop away with the chronicles. The mercenary leader wanted to leave this seed to ensure that the mercenary group would regain its life one day in the future. Unlike this group of real warriors, some of the other guys in the city who had military strength were now beginning to feel uneasy. After the meeting at the North Wind Tavern last night, the one-eyed Weather tossed and turned. He didn't have a good night's rest. After waking up in the morning, he made up his mind. As long as I have those cat's eye emerald coins, I can plant my flag wherever I go. In Weather's lair, ever since old Karen's identity as a monster was exposed and he was beheaded, Weather had changed the name of Karen's house to a new one. He gathered a group of his most daring subordinate. He didn't pick up the mayor who had made a deal with him yesterday. Instead, he led his subordinates in disguise and prepared to escape from the city through the secret passage. They used scarves to wrap the monarch's head and dressed up like a group of rural women. Each of them carried a wooden pole on their shoulders, and the boys hung pots of food and water on both ends of the pole. Weather himself kept all the opal emeralds. Their bodies were bulging and looked like fat, but they were actually stuffed with cotton wool to keep them warm and weapons for self-defense. "Open the secret passage in the closet. We'll go straight to Juniper Village," Weather said to his men. The original number 1 bandit in Soft Maple City, Sharon, due to his nature as a raven man, dug many underground tunnels in his lair. These tunnels were originally used for smuggling goods, but now they became the hope trail for the fugitives of Soft Maple City. Through them, Weather had arranged for many dignitaries to escape from soft Maple City. However, there was a tunnel hidden inside Weather's lair that he had never told anyone. Never sell the best goods. Looking at the dark entrance of the closet, Weather gave his subordinates a look. This path leads directly to Juniper Village, where the rebel army is entrenched. It's dangerous, but it's relatively safer. After that, he lifted the pole, picked up the windproof lantern on the fireplace, and was the first to walk down the stairs of the secret passage. Weather had his own plans for choosing this secret passage. Although the rebel army's territory was not a good choice for them, it was still 100 times better than being directly exposed in the wilderness and being hunted by terrifying monsters. Fortunately, the rebel army had their own military forces, and Juniper Village was far from the protrusion, so they should not have encountered the monsters yet. As long as they could bypass Juniper Village, Weather would be able to lead his men through the forest. They would follow a small path that was commonly used by smugglers in the forest for 2 days before arriving at a large city called Emerald Wood. It was a mountainous city with a city far stronger than soft Maple City's city defense system. The mayor of Emerald Wood City was different from the elected mayor of soft Maple City. They were both hereditary rulers, so their control over the city was strong, and the garrison was more reliable. Originally, a bandit like Weather would never step into Emerald Wood City. But considering the current terrible situation, he felt that it was safer to make a living there. Since I have enough money and a group of brothers, it's not a bad idea to be a rich man. He had such an idea, but he did not reveal it to any of his men, because now was not the time. On the journey around the Jinn village, and through the forest occupied by the rebels, he still needed his men to maintain a brave and resolute attitude. After all, the road ahead was long, and the weapons they carried with them might be put to good use in the future. Walking in the underground passage, Weather held up a windproof lantern to lead the way while planning how to bypass Juniper Village. His subordinates followed closely behind him. Every one of them kept their mouths tightly shut. During the 3 hourglasses of underground rapid march, no one made the slightest sound until they pushed open a secret door in the forest. In the forest around Juniper Village, there were some places that even the locals did not want to visit, because these places were chosen by the villagers to be the graveyard for the dead. After climbing out of a disguised grave and shaking off the wet mud on his body, Weather began to observe the surrounding environment. He had followed Sharon through this tunnel once before, so he had some impression of this place. Like soft Maple City, this place was also affected by the Demon Monarch technique, and the cold winter had come a few months earlier. But perhaps because of the distance, the temperature here was slightly higher than soft Maple City. There was not much snow, and there was not much snow on the ground, and many of the broad-leaved trees had not even shed their leaves. A group of women walked out of the village. One of his men had just climbed up a tree to take a look, and discovered something, then immediately slipped down to report to Weather. Everyone touched the guy in their arms. They were even more tense. Weather looked in the direction that the man pointed, and used his only remaining eye to observe. The bandit head revealed a sinister smile. "Get ready, loosen up your muscles. Our chance is here." Chapter 668. No matter how many years of hard work they had put in, every time they were in a battle, they would always feel a sense of fear. Sooner or later, they would have to pay for what they did. This feeling was innate to their profession, and it was impossible to get rid of. However, Weather did not have such a psychological barrier. Before every battle, he firmly believed that his name was not on the Grim Reaper's Book of Souls. This time was no exception. The cross-dressing bandits approached the group of village women. They pinched their throats and greeted them. Then, they quickly swarmed them and used their daggers to end their lives. They took the lead and stripped off the women's blood-stained clothes. Weather immediately ordered his subordinates to prepare grease and splash it on the surrounding trees. Then, they used the windproof lantern to ignite it. "Murder! There's a monster in the forest!" Under Weather's signal, they all imitated the women's voices and shouted loudly. Then, they grabbed their shoulder poles and backpacks and rushed towards the direction of Juniper Village. This village that was occupied by the rebel army had not been established for long. Therefore, the villagers were not familiar with each other. Villagers and soldiers could be seen everywhere. This was just a small town with few soldiers and lax discipline. When the village guards heard the screams of the women, many of them picked up their weapons and rushed over. Weather and his men lowered their heads and ran towards the village. They brushed past those people without being recognized. When they arrived at the entrance of the village, there was only one militia standing guard. That man was a shoemaker. He was busy hammering copper nails into a pair of boots that seemed to belong to an officer. His halberd was placed a dozen steps away. After running for more than 500 yards, all the bandits were panting from exhaustion. They could not even deal with an old grandmother. But now it seemed that their luck was not bad. The old grandmother did not appear. Kill him, then close the gate of the village. Steal a few horses and rush out from the other side of the village. Weather panted as he ordered in a low voice. His men moved quickly and finished what Weather had told them to do. Before the soldiers returned to Juniper Village, they were already on horseback. Set the place on fire and create chaos. Let's rush out. Weather took the lead, leaving a trail of dust behind him. The other bandits followed behind him, sweeping through the village while throwing all sorts of items to ignite the flames. When the rebel soldiers opened the gate and entered the village with the help of the villagers, they had no choice but to immediately participate in putting out the fire. They could not spare any extra manpower to chase after the villains who had committed murder and arson. Weather and his men successfully passed through the Juniper Village and entered the dense forest on their horses. This was much better than his original plan. Faster. Keep up with me and don't worry about the horse. Weather half crouched on the horse's back to ease the jolt. He brandished his sword and chopped down some of the branches that were in the way, preventing them from sweeping off the horses of his men who were not as skilled as him. With horses, they would be able to reach the smuggler's alley much faster. Perhaps they would be able to reach Greenwood City in less than 2 days. However, just as they were galloping, a strange arrow suddenly shot out from the dense forest. Whoosh! The arrow sank into the head of the horse that Weather was riding. The dead horse fell to its knees, and under the effect of inertia, Weather was flung away. He only stopped when he hit a pine tree. He felt that a few of his ribs were broken. Damn it! Before he could draw his weapon, the fallen horses were like a rock that blocked the path. One by one, they tripped over Weather's men who were following closely behind him. They all fell from their horses. Some were lucky and only had a few scratches. However, there were also some who suffered serious injuries. The most unlucky one even broke his neck after hitting his head on a tree. Ha ha ha! Chilling laughter came from above the injured bandits' heads. Weather looked up and saw an ugly monster floating in the air. In its hand was a longbow made of white bones. It's a monster! Shoot it to death. Otherwise, none of us will leave here alive. Weather immediately took out a small crossbow from his clothes and took the lead to shoot. Whoosh whoosh whoosh, under the lead of their boss, the bandits who could still move started to shoot arrows at the monster above their heads. However, firstly, their shooting speed was too slow. Secondly, the monster was too agile. It only needed to kick the tree trunk with its inverted legs to quickly change the direction of its flight. All the arrows fired by the bandits all missed. Boring game. Seeing that the bandits could not even aim at it, the monster suddenly spoke in human language. I am Calamity's General Shirgu. I am under the orders of the Emperor to carry out the hunting transformation ritual. You lucky bastards, don't resist. I will turn all of you into qualified hunters and warriors. You will be lucky enough to enter the Emperor's army and serve him. General Calamity. A bandit heard Shirgu's words and was so scared that he collapsed. He ignored his injuries and staggered into the dense forest beside him in an attempt to save his life. However, in the next second, Shirgu appeared in front of him. General Calamity extended his claws and pierced through his clothes, flesh, and one of his ribs. The bandit howled and fell to the ground. Shirgu spat in disgust. He put the rib bone in his mouth and chewed it twice. Then, the rib bone turned into an arrow with dark green light lingering around it. Poochie! Shirgu pierced the long arrow into the heart of the bandit, then walked to another poor guy who kept moving backward and repeated the previous action. When all the subordinates had a long arrow in their chest and were lying on the ground twitching, Weather had already stood up by leaning against the tree behind him. The bandit leader held 2 short knives in his hands and stared fiercely at General Calamity, who was walking toward him. "Come on, you ugly monster, I will make a few holes in you." Shirgu looked at him with interest and nodded. "Interesting. If you don't tremble, your words may be more persuasive." General Calamity did not continue to move forward. A grim smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. He took out a bone arrow from the dendrobium on his waist and slowly knocked it on the bone bow. The moment the arrow left the bowstring, the bone arrow sank into Weather's chest. The bandit leader's treatment was different from his subordinate. He did not lie on the ground but was nailed to the tree. He stood up straight and twitched nonstop. It's not easy to get the money to buy your life. In the harbor of Soft Maple City, Keyes, who was sitting on the top floor of the stern, looked at a crystal ball in front of him and shook his head helplessly. Chapter 669. Everyone had to be responsible for their own actions. With the cat's eye emerald coins given by Keyes, Weather and his bandits could not get rid of this restriction. In fact, when they received the money, they also gained something else. Human nature could not withstand the test, and Keyes would not believe in the morality of a group of bandits. In order to better control Weather's group, when they first met at Charon's house, he secretly planted Leviathan's organization on those people. Sure enough, when Soft Maple City was besieged, those living flesh and blood conveyed the news to Keyes through telepathy that Weather and the mayor met. And early the next morning, those guys hurriedly fled the city. Originally, the young blue dragon was going to punish them. After all, a bandit leader who was familiar with the streets was still useful for his next plan. But when he saw Tribulation preparing to turn those bandits into monsters, Keyes suddenly changed his mind. Although Leviathan's flesh and blood organization only had a part of the passive, adaptive ability, those monsters created by the Emperor were nothing special. With the ability of those flesh and blood, they should be able to perfectly adapt to this transformation. In this way, Keyes would have his own eyes in the Emperor's army. And with their adaptive ability, after Weather and the others were transformed, they would probably be much stronger than ordinary monsters. Maybe they would soon rise to the top. At that time, the Emperor's technology of creating and transforming creatures, which he had long coveted, would no longer be a secret. In addition, with Paru, Snade, and Shay's reverse engineering, they would definitely find a good idea to restrain the Emperor's violent soldiers. In fact, for 2 weeks, the reason why Keyes did not show up was that he had been busy interrogating Tribulation General captured by Sacred Samurai Jensen. He wanted to get more information about the Emperor from his brain. But the result was not ideal. The body of the Tribulation General was very strange. The 3 researchers spent a long time and found that the body of the Tribulation General seemed to be protected by a special power. They even dissected it more than 30 times, but every time they put away the equipment, the Tribulation General would change into another form, and its body would be as good as new. "That guy gave me a very bad feeling," Shay reported to Keyes. As a remnant of the wondrous craftsman, there were not many creatures that could make him feel the opposite. His soul energy is mixed with entropy energy, and he has the typical characteristic of the illusionary serpent clan, changeable and unpredictable. If my guess is correct, that Emperor might have created a brand new type of illusionary snake. The so-called illusionary snake was a native species of the Chaos Sea. they were the purest incarnations of chaos. They slithered through the uncertainty of the chaos sea without any rules, freely reshaping reality into what they imagined. The illusionary serpent had a primitive philosophy and appearance. It was rumored that, aside from some high-level Hung controllers, they were the race that could best embody the duality of creation and destruction. Their language changed so much that few outsiders could understand them without the help of magic. Because they had a variety of reproduction methods, including the combination of the two sexes, fission and derivation, and self-generation into new individuals. There were even many reproductive methods that ordinary people could not understand. So it was impossible to do ecological research on them. Long before the first confrontation between order and chaos, most of the outer plane was still filled with the primordial matter of chaos. At that time, the wondrous craftsmen, who were the first to come out of the mechanical realm, forged the first batch of enforcers as the vanguard to attack the forces of chaos. And the enemy that those original enforcers had to fight against was the illusionary serpent clan that always wanted to return order to chaos. And it was because of the enforcers' efforts that when the war between order and chaos gradually subsided, the existence of the outer plane was stabilized. The chaotic illusionary serpents could no longer enter and exit their lairs at will and use entropy to erode the order universe where the wondrous craftsmen lived. "We have to figure out the Emperor's technology," Shay said in a resolute tone. "No matter what kind of conspiracy he has, it's just a random creation of a brand new illusionary serpent. His technology must be completely obtained, cracked, and the final countermeasures found. Otherwise, if we let him continue to develop, it is likely to threaten the balance between order and chaos in the multiverse." After listening to his report, Keyes suddenly felt a headache coming on. Obviously, he just wanted to destroy a dwarf god, but who would have thought that he would encounter a big problem that could affect the conflict between order and chaos? If he was really an ordinary blue dragon, perhaps the best choice now would be to find Stim and quickly go all out. If he could win, then he would fight. If he could not, then he would leave immediately. But when he reached his level of strength, he could actually vaguely feel the profound influence of his faction on him. If he took the initiative to leave now and let the balance between order and chaos be broken, even if it was possible to break, he estimated that he would immediately deviate from his faction, and perhaps he would no longer be able to gain the favor of the power of order in the future. After staying on his ship for 2 weeks, Keyes had been hesitating whether he should temporarily change his target and do his best to eliminate the Emperor as much as possible. But that guy was not like Stim. Keyes basically did not know much about him, let alone know his weaknesses or strength. If he rashly rushed forward, there was a high probability that he would not have a good ending. So, when he felt that Weather and the others who were possessed by Leviathan's biological organization had been turned into monsters by tribulation under the Emperor's command, he was so excited. Just a bag of green broken glass in exchange for the possibility of stealing all kinds of information about the Emperor, this transaction was simply a profit with little capital. No, it was simply a profit with no capital. Those people were now a sharp knife that had been inserted into the Emperor's navel. If used properly, Keyes might be able to use this knife to dig out the Emperor's intestines. Now that things had come to this, no matter what, he could not fall short. Thus, from this moment onwards, he entered into a tight and intense plan. For example, the other Plane Legion in the Ash World, the Wheel of Fortune Casino in Sigil City, the various powerful races in the island world, the thousands of Leviathan beasts in the scale of perpetual order, and so on. Not to mention the power that he could directly mobilize, even the power that he could indirectly borrow from the Gods Association and the army of the 9 prisons of Bader also appeared in Keyes's various alternative plans. Chapter 670. The mayor of Emeraldwood City rode his horse out of the city's iron gate. The mount he was riding was obviously a pure-blooded breed. It was tall and strong, exuding vigor. Its glossy maroon body was like a painter's perfect interpretation of a fine steed. The mayor was dressed luxuriously. He wore a red and yellow brocade robe, a white ribbon, and emblems carved from various gems were embellished on his velvet jacket. He was like a moving treasury, attracting attention no matter where he went. He looked to be in his 30s. His expression was cold and resolute, and his eyes had a craftiness that only old people would have. His hair was darker than the night, and he wore a triangular hat with white ostrich feathers trailing behind it. Wherever he went, everyone would automatically make way for him. In order to match his image, the mayor was accompanied by 2 riders. They were wrapped in black clothes and pants, and wore black leather armor. The horses they rode, as well as the saddles and reins of the horses, were all black. One of them held a black spear in his hand, and the spearhead was made of black steel. The other person carried a huge horn on his back, and without a doubt it was also painted black. Riding his horse along the stone path in front of the gate, the mayor of Emerald Wood City approached the group of blue-armored envoys. He first nodded slightly in greeting, and then said to the other party, "Welcome to Lawn Maple City. Please forgive me for not going out to meet you. Sir, please move to the camp at the foot of the mountain. The alliance ceremony of Red Pine, Black Willow, Lawn Maple, and Emerald Wood City is about to begin." The leader of the envoy group took a step forward, bowed deeply, and said to the mayor of Emerald Wood City. After the other party nodded in agreement, he followed the etiquette of the alliance and walked in front of the mayor of Emerald Wood City. He grabbed the horse's bridle and personally led the horse forward. The 2 black knights followed closely behind, leaving less than half a horse's length behind the mayor. After that, the personal guards of the mayor of Emerald Wood City followed. They were all elite soldiers selected from the garrison troop. The path down the mountain was paved with stone slabs, and there was a sentry station of Emerald Wood City every few hundred yards. When the procession passed by, the sentinel would immediately stand up straight, puff out his chest, and raise his head to give the mayor his blessings, appearing very stylish. Amidst the continuous chanting, the procession unhurriedly walked down the mountain, dragging a long tail behind them. A camp had already been set up at the foot of the mountain. The flags of Red Pine City, Black Willow City, and Lan Fong City were already hung high on the flagpoles in front of the camp. When the mayor of Jadewood City arrived, the green triangular flag representing Jadewood began to slowly rise. When he led the troops into the camp, the flags of the 4 cities were already raised and fluttering in the wind. Mayor Green, the other 3 mayors, who were waiting in the center of the camp, greeted the mayor of Emerald Wood City when they saw him arrive. Although they didn't see each other often, because of the city's trade, they had a lot of interests, so they weren't strangers to each other. This time, he was here at Grimm's invitation to discuss matters regarding the alliance and the reinforcement of Soft Maple City. "Sorry to keep you waiting. Please don't take offense, please forgive us." The mayor of Emerald Wood City got off his horse and walked in front of the other 3 mayors, greeting them. Don't mention it, please come in quickly to discuss matters regarding the alliance." That's right. Now the news from Soft Maple City has seriously damaged the trade and must be dealt with quickly. That's right. When these big shots were still being polite, an untimely cough suddenly sounded, abruptly interrupting their words. If you still dilly-dally like this, then Soft Maple City will really be in a precarious situation. Without the lips, the teeth will be cold, sirs. Who are they? Why are there a few half-giants in the camp? Mayor Green looked at the big guy who just spoke, his face obviously not looking good. As the ruler of a mountain city, the Green family had been enemies with the mountain giants who tried to loot Emerald Wood City for generations. They took hunting the mountain giants as their responsibility. If the family's descendant wanted to become the mayor, then this Green had to complete a hunt alone before his 18th birthday and bring back a complete mountain giant's scalp as a saddle pad. As the current mayor of Emeraldwood City, this green naturally also went through a hunting ritual. Moreover, due to generations of hatred, the Green family was also hostile to other types of giants that were distant relatives of the mountain giants, or creatures with giant blood. They did not like anything related to giants. So when he saw Goliath, he thought that he was some kind of half-giant. Watch your mouth, kid. A Goliath with gray skin dotted with dark and light-colored stripes walked out from his partner's side. Hard lumps that looked like pebbles were distributed on his neck, shoulders, and arms, as if he had been wearing a natural armor made of bones and thick skin. We are not dirty half-giants. We are Goliath, the son of the mountains. Goliath? Grim looked at the other mayors. Because he knew nothing about this race, when they denied that they had giant blood, he did not even notice the disrespect in their words. They are indeed not giants. Without waiting for the mayors to speak, a tent in the camp was opened, and a person in a priest's costume walked out. They are the children of the mountains that can be trusted, and also our ally, the representatives sent by the scale of perpetual order to guide us to take a shortcut to Soft Maple City. The one who spoke was not a bystander, but the priest on duty at the Haones temple. He just had a meeting with the clergy from other cities, including the god of power cord, the god of forging Gond, the god of mountains and protection, the god of mountains and paladins who had a friendly relationship with the Haones church, and also some clergy from other good or neutral churches. He had confirmed that the emperor had indeed awakened. The Ramses must now reunite to resist the ambition and anger of the ancient slave master. The ones who protected him through the blockade of the monsters and came to participate in this meeting were the Goliath warriors of the scale of perpetual order, and the paladins who were originally at the Haones were all left in Soft Maple City. Mayor Grim. Seeing the priest on duty come out of the tent, the mayor of Red Pine City, who was the most influential among the mayors, had already guessed that he had persuaded the churches to unite. This is the priest of the Haones temple. He can confirm the authenticity of the emperor's awakening, and that Soft Maple City is indeed in danger. And the crisis it faces, if we do not help, is likely to soon spread to our own city. The 4 cities must now be united, form a coalition, and quickly reinforce Soft Maple City. Otherwise, when the city falls, we will face enemies several times more than now. Chapter 671. Under the efforts of the various churches, the 4 cities' alliance was held in a very short time. The 3 mayors of Red Pine, Black Willow, and Blue Maple gathered all the seals that symbolized the city's military affairs and handed them to the youngest mayor of Emerald City, Grim. We must set out. Soft Maple City has already held on for half a month and 6 days. We doubt it can hold on for another week. The newly appointed leader of the 4 cities' alliance listened to the advice of Hierones's prayer priest and led the alliance army of the 4 cities to set out immediately. More than 20,000 people marched quickly through the official road in the forest, and Emerald City was responsible for the army's supplies. Perhaps in the eyes of the Goliaths who had experienced the bloody battle in the abyss, this scale of military force was actually nothing. But in the Ramsey world, this was already the highest standard of battle array. The Ramsey world had been peaceful for a long time, and the last time several cities formed a war alliance was already a few hundred years ago. The Ramsey army was only prepared to resolve the military conflicts between the city-states. But because of Keys's order, the Goliath soldiers still strictly carried out their mission, and did not dare to relax in the slightest. Their trip was not only to protect Hierones's prayer priest, but also to point out a safe way for the Alliance army to reach Soft Maple City. The safety of this route must be tested, because in the near future, there would be more people going in the opposite direction. In front of us is the territory of the rebel army. If we pass through from here, wouldn't it be a waste of time? Sitting on horseback, Grim, who had changed out of his gorgeous clothes and put on a dark green armor, asked Goliath who was walking beside him. Hearing his doubts, the tall soldier with the nickname Broken Bear Head shook his head and silently took out a letter sealed with wax that Keyes asked Brock to give him before leaving. "Lord Keyes asked me to take you this way," he said, neither quickly nor slowly. "He said that as long as I give this letter to the rebel army's leader, Rake, that person will not only let us pass, but may also join our army." "Rake?" Grim repeated the name and thought for a moment. "The rebel army's alchemy warlock officer. It seems that your president of the Scale of Perpetual Order has a lot of connections. Who else does he know?" "There's plenty, kid," Crushed Bear Chieftain replied indifferently. He ignored the displeased look on Grim's face and strode to the front of the line. Based on the distance they had traveled, they had already entered the rebel army's territory. He was about to carry out Lord Keyes's mission and deliver a letter to the rebel leader. A groundhog-like head suddenly popped out from the weed. He was secretly sizing up the approaching soldiers. After counting the number of carriages, he silently calculated, "I'm afraid there are more than 20,000 people. Oh my God!" The procession was so long that the dust had drifted to where he was hiding. The creaking of the horse's harness was getting louder and louder. The weather in the past few days had been very unusual. In the blink of an eye, the scorching summer weather, which made people sweat profusely, turned into a cold winter. Although he was arranged to spy on the military situation here, his mind had already drifted to the warm fire pit. However, when he saw so many soldiers, he could not help but have a serious expression on his face. The soldiers all looked solemn and pale. They were all veterans. Thinking that he had seen the situation clearly, the scout silently crawled back and wanted to run through the weeds back to the camp to report. But when he got up from the ground, he found that a black shadow had appeared behind him. The gigantic man was grinning at him. If it wasn't for the door-sized axe in his hand, he would have looked friendlier. "It's my pleasure to serve you, little guy." Just as the scout was about to give it his all, Shattered Bear Head extended his arm and pushed him, causing him to fall to the ground. The Goliath soldier took out a letter and handed it to him. "Give it to Rake, but you better hurry." After saying this, Crushed Bear Chieftain turned and left to catch up with the advancing Alliance army. About half an hourglass later, the letter appeared on Rake's desk. The old rebel leader used a short knife to cut open the wax seal and open the letter that Keyes specially sent. "The mayor is a coward, but Rake is more capable than him. Bring your balls and swords and join the adventure of power." After reading this line of doggerel, Rake's brows furrowed as he fell into a state of confusion. However, when he saw the light red stain on the edge of the letter, his eyes suddenly lit up. In addition to his identity as the leader of the rebel army, Rake was also a well-known alchemist. Although his skills were not comparable to those famous alchemists in Ramsey, at least he had the basic professionalism. He gently picked up the letter with tweezers and put it on the table. Rake began to search for some of his own reagent. Finally, he picked up a small wooden box with a red label. He took out the powder in the box with a spoon, poured it into a stone bowl on the table, and then mixed it with distilled water. He stood on a feather and gently brushed the red liquid on the letter. "This is..." After the letter was wet with the red liquid, Rake's eyes involuntarily widened to the size of a bell. He quickly opened his private research notes and compared them with the experimental records he had written one by one. He kept muttering to himself, "So that's how it is. So that's how it is. The secret of making gemstone coins." After 2 hourglasses, an army of 500 strong rebel soldiers appeared in front of the coalition army of the 4 cities. At first, the two sides were naturally at daggers drawn, but after Shredded Bear walked over and said a few words to Rake, the tense atmosphere suddenly disappeared. Rake not only led people to join the coalition army, but he also pointed out a shortcut to Gin Village for Mayor Green. That is the village closest to Soft Maple City, and there is a ready-made wall. Although it is a simple defense facility, it is enough for the army to establish a stronghold there. Soft Maple City is already surrounded by monsters. Instead of rashly going there, it is better to send a small reconnaissance team to explore the enemy, and then contact the people in the city, and then arrange the next step of the army. Just because of a letter, they were able to make a veteran rebel army leader, who had been at odds with the various cities for a long time, surrender. This truly made Mayor Green of Emerald Wood City somewhat astonished. Moreover, the advice given by the other side was very pertinent. He also had some information about the Jinn village, and it should have nothing to do with traps. Therefore, the coalition army marched for another 2 hourglasses and finally arrived at Jinn village. Chapter 672. Know yourself and know your enemy, and you will never be defeated. Keyes had always believed in this ancient wisdom. Therefore, when he set out to deal with the Emperor, he not only began to investigate all kinds of information about the Emperor, but also paid attention to the power and influence he could borrow. Although it seemed a bit insignificant, those rebels, like the Four-City Alliance, could sometimes turn into a sharp knife. In the hands of an ordinary person, the sharp knife might only be used to cut fruit. But in the hands of Keyes, if arranged properly, he even had the confidence to stab and stir up the Emperor's intestines. What's more, after some investigation, he found that it was not difficult to hold the sharp knife in his hands. Just with the guarantee of power and a formula to burn the opal emerald, which was the green glass, he succeeded in exchange for Rake's temporary help. This was something that was beneficial but not costly, so why not? In this way, the Four-City Alliance, the rebels around Soft Maple City, and the existing military forces in Soft Maple City were all pulled into the same boat by Keyes. Although the boat looked quite dilapidated, at least it could float. In the face of an unfathomable enemy like the sea, he was given a sampan to stand on. Compared to Keyes, the Emperor's plan was more worrying. The ancient ruler of Ramsey wanted to do too much, but he could do too little. Even if he had resurrected all the generals sent by the Raven Man, he still needed to take care of many things himself, and there was no way to spare energy to carry out the next step of the plan. What about Shirgu? With legs as thick as pillars, the Emperor walked on the path of the hatchery. The temple that originally belonged to the god of valor, Hrones, had been changed into a new place for the monsters. The semi-finished monsters pulled by Shirgu would be buried in the magically distorted soil and spontaneously form cocoon-like things. When they were fully mature, they would break out of the cocoon. Hearing His Majesty's question, Tribulation, who followed His Majesty, touched his head. He was wearing an armor made of magma steel, and his gauntlet hand held a whip. Every time he swung it, lightning would streak across the sky. Compared with his body, his chest and shoulders were much wider. Even the strongest orc warrior would be overshadowed by him. Pure flames continuously seeped out from the scars on his body where there was no armor. On his broad shoulders, there was a face with deep facial features and 2 huge curved horns on his forehead. His eyes, which were completely composed of raging flames, were bright. "My lord, I don't know." "Of course you don't know." The Emperor glanced at his general. Perhaps it was because the infernal flames had burned the orc apprentice's brain when he used the burnt sacrifice demon's flesh to modify him. Therefore, even though the dog tamer looked energetic, he was actually a brainless idiot. You only know how to wait for those little puppies to be born, then whip them ruthlessly with your whip and make them bite their prey. I'm dog trainer. The Emperor waved his hand. Looking at the devil's claw that was about to fall on his body, even if the dog trainer's brain wasn't working well, he still felt fear. His body began to tremble. However, the pain he imagined did not come. The Emperor just patted his armor twice. "Yes, you're dog trainer. But now you have to help me call Shirgu back, then take those puppies and rescue Soul Search and his wife from that terrible city." "Yes, my lord." After the dog trainer turned and left, the Emperor took a deep breath. The air in the hatchery was humid and hot, like a skunk covered in a woolen cloth after being smashed. In order to create the soil that could hatch monsters, he had extracted heat from a radius of more than 30 miles, which caused the area around soft Maple City to suddenly become cold. Casting such a large-scale spell was not an easy task, even for the Emperor. He took 2 or 3 days to fully recover his strength. It was precisely because of this that only a few scattered monsters attacked soft Maple City a while ago. That was just a small trick he had used to test the waters. His goal was to stall for time. But now the Emperor had fully recovered his strength, and he had lost his patience. So he had to speed up the hatching process, just like he promised the dog trainer, so that Tribulation was no longer a commander without an army. He had to have enough puppies to spur him on so that the dog trainer could live up to his name. Faites le Kajuri. Slowly chanting the incantation, the Emperor raised both of his hands high. Black flames soared into the sky and reached the top of the dome. The rotating clouds formed an eye-like cyclone, and the surrounding heat was gradually absorbed by the eye again. Then, after the Emperor's personal transformation, it was finally injected into the hatching cocoons. The slowly maturing monsters had already gained consciousness. They roared in the cocoons, and a large amount of heat catalyzed them to activate another set of energy supply organs in their bodies in addition to the digestive system of normal creatures. The color of molten fire lit up in front of their chests, and the outer membrane of the cocoons began to show traces of scorch. Accompanied by a series of tearing sounds, monsters that had been completely transformed tore open the hatching cocoons and were born from them. Although they were originally just ordinary humans, they had now become the size of horses. Their low horns curved forward and their skin was covered with scales. Their bodies were dark red and dotted with terrifying black spots. The long brown hair on his back was originally stuck to his back, but it was quickly dried by his own body temperature. They were modified creatures that had fused with the characteristics of the infernal creatures, the Hound Demon. Their bodies were strong and muscular, and they were the most brutal hunters. Their hind legs were shorter than their front legs, similar to hyenas, but they could stand and fight for a short period of time. Their front claws were similar to the rootless fingers of humans, and their sharp claws were more than half a foot long. The puppies that these dog trainers spoke of did not have the innocent and cute faces of puppies. Their faces were extremely unique, like wolves but also like some kind of reptile. Long and sharp fangs protruded from their narrow and ferocious jaws. Their eyes were quite narrow, and almost all of them were white, but there was a fierce light in their eyes. At first glance, one could tell that they were the most ferocious beasts. Chapter 673. Blazing Shadow Beast, Come Out of the Cage. Looking at more than 500 little puppies that had just broken out of their cocoons, the Emperor's terrifying face showed a sinister smile. He walked out of the hatchery with his 4 thick legs and took a deep breath of cold air. Affected by the side effect of casting spells, some of the heat that had just accumulated in the past few days within a radius of more than 30 miles was once again sucked out. The wind howled again, and the situation of soft Maple City was precarious. Damn it, my ship! The ship owners sitting in the North Wind Tavern were not the only one who made similar sorrowful cries. The temperature plummeted again, causing the seawater on the shore to solidify. The huge icicles even cut the breakwater. Most of the ships docked at the dock had been crushed by the ice. Only some sampans were dragged ashore by the ship owners in advance due to their light weight. Now, they were lucky not to become a pile of broken boards. Old Bobby, who never worried about holes in the wall, quickly dug out some boards and nails to add many quick patches to the walls of the North Wind Tavern. After doing all that, even someone as optimistic as him as the tavern owner started to worry. Done, 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 done. After flipping over the cinders in the brazier, old Bobby made the flame burn brighter and made the bar warmer. He then took out the secret honey wine that had been hidden under the bar for a long time and gulped it down before he could breathe a sigh of relief. But before he could completely relax, a cry full of jealousy and resentment made him nervous again. "Why is that ship fine?" An inexplicably sad and indignant merchant suddenly discovered that in the harbor berth, there was a ship unscathed in this terrible disaster that suddenly befell. Around it, even the seawater did not condense into indestructible ice. That's right, that ship was Keyes's ship. As an existence that merged with the Leviathan, the battleship was a living ship. Feeling the sudden drop in temperature, the biological furnace inside its body began to operate. Like a heater, the ship constantly released heat to the surroundings to prevent the seawater from condensing and ice from causing damage to the hull. Why is it fine? Could it be related to the monster? That's right, that's right. A few days after it arrived, those monsters surrounded Soft Maple City. That ship might be a monster. We can't keep it. Burn it. Otherwise, this ship will be a disaster sooner or later. That ship is so big. Maybe there are some valuable things on it that can make up for our losses. The emotional merchants and ship owners talked more and more excessively, so that old Bobby finally extinguished the thought of persuading them. It was unknown who was the first to stand up, but then a large group of people followed suit. They pushed open the door of the North Wind Tavern with a bang and walked excitedly to the harbor outside the breakwater. It seemed that they wanted to put their idea into practice. In just a few minutes, the Northern Wind Tavern was completely empty. There was only one person sitting at a table, sipping a frothy beer. His face was filled with a strange expression, as if he was waiting to watch a good show. "Sir, we are closed." Old Bobby had a sense of disgust for no reason, so he bluntly started to drive the person away. The person turned his head and glanced at the tavern owner. He just said faintly, "Oh." Then, he took out a broken gem coin from his arms and threw it on the bar counter. The coin collided with the wooden bar counter, making a gulyalu sound. Old Bobby didn't reach out to take the money. He just glared at the customer who paid for the drink in a very disrespectful way. The meaning was obvious. Ha ha! When the person saw this scene, he didn't think it was disrespectful. He just stood up and walked slowly to the door of the North Wind Tavern with the glass of beer. However, when he passed by the bar counter, he said to old Bobby indifferently, "Greed often leads to ignorance, and ignorance is often followed by blind obedience. Don't you think so, tavern owner?" After saying this, he wrapped his clothes around himself again. Terrible cold air. After complaining softly, the drinker pushed open the door of the tavern and walked into the cold wind outside without looking back. When he left the North Wind Tavern, old Bobby breathed a sigh of relief. His palm also took down a wooden stick with a lump under the bar counter. The person just sat in the seat and didn't show it, but when the person approached him, old Bobby felt a little frightened for no reason. It was like the feeling he had when he went out to sea as a crew when he was young and was attacked by a giant octopus. This person has a problem. Old Bobby secretly judged after drinking a mouthful of secret honey wine to calm himself down. However, his judgment was both right and wrong. Yes, that person did have a problem. His true identity was a calamity general who had just been resurrected not long ago. His nickname was Foolish Jian. What was wrong was that Foolish Jian was not a human at all. Before becoming a calamity general, Foolish Jian was a one-eyed eagle monster. Some kind of terrifying shapeshifter who wandered around the tropical coastal areas to hunt all day long. They had long been accustomed to using their special abilities to spread fear, chaos, and turmoil day and night. Only those things could alleviate his insatiable dual desire for violence and chaos. When he met the Emperor and received the gift of knowledge and experimental transformation, the one-eyed eagle monster became a unique existence. He became Foolish Jian and served the Emperor as a calamity general. Every time he infiltrated an enemy's city and stirred up deadly chaos and suspicion among the ordinary people, he enjoyed a supreme sense of satisfaction. The farce has begun. The next goal: should I go to Dwarf Island as a guest first, or should I go to the mayor of this city? Changing back to his original appearance, foolish Jian squatted at the top of a tall building, overlooking the noisy dock in the distance. His pair of huge bat-like wings were covered with khaki lean muscles. On the noseless face, a terrifying single eye flashed with evil light. After creating a chaotic farce, he would always find a suitable position to watch. This was his greatest pleasure. What a strange one-eyed eagle monster! Just when foolish opinion was expecting the farce to reach its climax, a soft whisper interrupted his mood, and the name one-eyed eagle monster ignited a flame of anger in his heart. He was foolish opinion, the one and only foolish opinion, not some one-eyed eagle monster. However, before he could refute, a pair of cold metal palms clamped his neck. Extreme spell, Snade's amber specimen. With a strong wave of magic, a strange brown amber covered in Yu Jian's body and quickly solidified. After doing this, the exhaust pipe on the back of the steampunk half-lich spewed out gas. He seemed to be excited because he caught an experimental sample. You're welcome to my lab as a guest. If you are lucky, maybe this trip will not be a one-way ticket. Chapter 674. It turned out that those who only knew how to scheme behind the scenes were 99% coward. No matter how unique a one-eyed eagle was, it was still a one-eyed eagle. After the experiment, Snader dragged the bloody body of the fool to the torture room on the lower deck. The strong ogre Neru waved his hungry fists and gave him a little help. What do you want to know? I'll say it. I know the Emperor's next plan for Soft Maple City. You sound so weak, it's obvious that you're lying. Neru ignored him, and the steampunk half-lich nodded in agreement. Bam! 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 The fists hit the flesh and even the bones. Neru's iron fists bloomed bright and dazzling flowers on the body of the fool. Tribulation also wanted to use his ability called Grief Reaper to heal, but the creatures around him, especially Neru who was punching him, were very happy, and there were no negative emotions for him to harvest. The blazing shadow beasts have been released from their cages, the Hound Tamer has been resurrected by the Emperor, and Soft Maple City will fall at midnight today. Bam! Neru's fist hit the face of the fool, and Tribulation, who could no longer bear the heavy blow, fainted. What he said just now seems to be true. Neru was not an unscrupulous fool. Most of his performance just now was just an act, but after getting the information he wanted, his face showed a more ferocious smile. Find Paru and ask for some herbalism to replenish his energy. He can still hold on for another round. Just as they were fiddling with the culprit behind the rumor, a fierce conflict broke out at the harbor. The harbor emperor, who was fully convinced by keys with the cat's eye emerald coins, led his men to confront the merchants and ship owners who had lost their minds because of the loss of their ships. Crossbowmen, get ready, the tax official at the harbor shouted. If they dare to take another step forward, they will immediately be regarded as rioters and shot on the spot without mercy. His tone was very firm. Now there was only one decent ship in the harbor. If Soft Maple City still had a future, his income would definitely be closely related to that ship. Although the merchants and ship owners had become blind followers due to the special ability of foolish opinion, it did not mean that they had lost their wisdom. Sometimes, extreme people could even come up with more ideas than normal people and create more trouble than normal people. What are you doing? A merchant ship owner standing in the front row felt someone kick him in the waist. Then, he couldn't help but fall forward. The crossbow arrows of the dock guards pierced into the body of this unlucky guy. In this conflict, the first drop of blood was shed. What's there to be afraid of? We have more people. Let's kill them, snatch that ship, and run. 8 or 9 out of 10 people who ran merchants on the sea all year round were villains. As long as they had the chance, they wouldn't mind acting as pirates. Although most of these people chose to put away their bandit faces after they landed, their ruthlessness could no longer be contained after their ships were destroyed by the floating ice. Many ship owners took out their knives, and the sailors behind them also took out their weapons when they saw the boss's intention. They swarmed forward and rushed towards the dock guards who were changing their crossbows. Soon, the dock guards were overwhelmed by this group of crazy thugs. Many of them had wounds caused by several weapons and fell to the ground. The dock emperor was no longer as stubborn as before. He turned around and ran along the pier towards Key's ship. As he ran, he shouted, "Someone is rioting. They want to rob your ship. Quickly throw me a gangway ladder and pull it up. I'll defend against the attack of the thugs with you." Fazak, who was standing on the deck, couldn't help but twitch his mouth. The orc's night vision was much better than humans. He just saw the scene of the dock guards being wiped out. Even with weapons in hand, they can still be beaten down by a group of merchants. Are the guards of Soft Maple City useless? But because he was instructed by Keys, although he was disdainful, he still threw a rope to the dock tax officer. "Tie yourself up," the orc shouted at the top of his voice. "I'll get someone to pull you up with a winch." Just as the fat tax official was about to be pulled to the side of the ship, the group of merchant ship owners who had already transformed into thugs had already taken care of the last guard. They brought their own ship's crew and squeezed through the trestle towards Quest's ship in a grandiose manner. Because the sea was frozen, some people simply ran over the ice. These people held grappling hooks and ropes in their hands and were ready to climb the ship's side. Woo 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 woo. The steam whistle suddenly sounded. Hearing this sound, all the warriors on the deck got busy. Even the sailor in charge of pulling the winch just wedged a cork in the winch, and then ran to his post. They had all received special training before and knew that this was an instruction to enter combat status. So no matter what they were doing, they had to immediately put down and get into combat position to wait for orders. They weren't the only ones moving. After the steam whistle sounded, the half-Leviathan biological battleship was also ready to fight. It stretched out a large number of flippers from its body below the surface of the sea, fiddling with the seawater to change its direction. It faced the frozen sea with the wide side of the ship instead of the relatively narrow stern. However, as the giant ship suddenly adjusted its direction, the entire pier of the mooring was squeezed into ruins. The fragments of the pier that shot out swept away the thugs who had been controlled by greed and jealousy. Many people fell into a pool of blood. Some even more miserable people were swept off the pier and fell into the mixture of ice and water that had just melted. There were many more gun holes on the side of the Leviathan. They were divided into 3 rows. More than 150 modified Hellscream were pushed onto the gun rack. The sailors inside were nervously busy. The dock emperor was lucky. He was hanging near a gun hole. In order not to affect the shooting vision, the sailors dragged him in through the gun hole and cut the rope tied to his body. He wanted to thank the sailor who saved his life, but who knew that he would be pushed aside by those people. "Go to the top deck. Don't get in the way here." So he stumbled to the stairs and finally climbed to the top of the deck after some effort. The deck, which had many people stationed just now, was now empty. The dock tax officer took 2 deep breaths and then walked to the side of the ship. He wanted to see what had happened and what had caused the giant ship to become so hostile. However, his vision was only average. In the dark night, he couldn't see what was happening on the frozen sea. He could only vaguely see some lantern-sized red dots flickering. Chapter 675. That thing is really a blazing shadow beast. Keys stood at the top of the poop tower and looked at the monsters moving swiftly on the frozen sea. His sharp eyes captured every detail of the monsters. That emperor has definitely been to the Ash World. Paru and Snade had studied the modified monsters that had been restored by the Salim Desert Elf tribe for a period of time, so Keys was no stranger to them. At that time, he was very interested in this kind of monster that had another way of supplying energy. The blazing shadow beast needs to take in black oil to have enough power. Before coming to Ramsey, Keyes had checked all kinds of situations in this world, but he had never seen a material like black oil being used in large quantities. Therefore, after seeing the appearance of the blazing shadow beast group, he had some doubts. Why did the Emperor choose to use magic to extract the heat in the air to supply energy? While he was still thinking, the cannons on the Leviathan began to roar. After days of dormancy, the residents of Soft Maple City had gradually forgotten the shock when they saw the giant ship that day. Now, it reminded them in its own way. What a powerful technological creation! Standing on the top of the paper tower, and looking at the sudden outbreak of war on the coastline, the mayor of the city could not help but sigh. Usually, he rarely came to the paper tower, but after the top of the paper tower turned into a terrace, he always liked to stop here. Especially when he learned from the secret agent that the current head of the thieves in the city, Weather, had disappeared for 2 days. He came here every night. The current mayor was old and pedantic, physically and mentally exhausted, and was no longer as high-spirited as before. The former raging flames, the former inexhaustible power, and the former exuberant ambition had all disappeared. But just as the same people could not deny history, the mayor of Soft Maple City did have those things. However, after a long time on the throne of power, anyone's passion would be covered by a thick layer of dust. Just like the 80 pounds of ancient documents that had been dug out of the tower of paper and were now piled around him. The past of the oldly may be the key to the secret door, the mayor muttered to himself as he stroked the thick bearskin cover of the Diary of the Past Mayors of Soft Maple City. Instead of continuing to be superstitious about the power of others, it's better to look for the elixir in history. At least when I'm still the mayor of Maple City, I can still read these history books. In fact, other than knowing that Weather had disappeared for 2 days, he also found out about the fate of those thieves through other channels. He learned that there were 2 tragedies near Juniper Village. One of them was the village women who had their throats slit. The other was Weather and the others who had been turned into monsters. The mayor even saw with his own eyes the human skin shed from Weather's group after they were transformed. I will never let such a thing happen to me and my family. The mayor shuddered at the thought of the horrifying human skin. However, he did not ask the servant to bring him a brazier. Instead, he wanted to use the cold to clear his mind. The emperor was sealed near Soft Maple City for a reason. Before he became the mayor, he was the apprentice of a master alchemist in Soft Maple City, and he was the best among the apprentices. If he did not join the political circle later, he might have even inherited his master's mantle. It was during that time of study that he discovered a very interesting thing. Every alchemist apprentice was taught a variety of knowledge in the early stages of their studies. They had to memorize more than 130 of the most basic alchemy formulas. Most of the basic formulas were the foundation of the later intermediate and advanced formulas. However, there were 2 formulas that did not seem to have any connection with the intermediate and advanced formulas. The 2 formulas were neither for refining potions nor for synthesizing special materials. They could only purify and separate a substance called black oil, and then refine it into 2 other substances called light oil and heavy oil. The role of the light oil and heavy oil was only for burning. There was not much difference between them and the black oil. At that time, the mayor was smart and eager to learn, so he once asked his master, "What is the use of these 2 formulas? Why do all alchemist apprentices have to memorize the knowledge?" In the face of his question, the master alchemist could not give a reasonable explanation. He could only explain, "This is the tradition of the alchemist apprentices in Soft Maple City. In the whole Ramsey world, only Soft Maple City has this technology. It may not be useful now, but it may come in handy one day." Although his teacher's explanation did not dispel the doubts in his heart, He still firmly remembered the conversation at that time. He also firmly remembered the 2 basic formulas in his mind, and he still could not forget them until now. As he grew older, he began to pursue power, and the doubts of his youth had long been thrown to the corner of his memory. But now the Emperor had awakened, and various monsters had forced Soft Maple City into a desperate situation. Under great pressure, the mayor suddenly had some guesses about the tradition of Soft Maple City. Therefore, he indulged in the pile of old papers in the paper tower for days, trying to find the answer. The weapons of the dwarfs were not very reliable. There were always all kinds of problems, so they used the treasures under Ramsay as currency to buy brand new war machines from the outside world. Dwarfs and human pilots. The war was won, and the Emperor was sealed. In order to prevent the war machines from creating the next Emperor, they were buried as a last resort. In Soft Maple Tower, underground, the mayor's seal is the activation. Alchemist apprentice. Tradition. After searching day and night for 4 days, the mayor finally found the words that could confirm his guess in a 1,000-year-old book called The Diary of the Past Mayors of Soft Maple City. Even if some of the words were missing, he could still decipher their general meaning. Under the Tower of Soft Maple City, there are reliable weapons hidden to deal with the crisis. They need light oil and heavy oil as driving force, and the mayor's seal is the key to activating those weapons. With bloodshot eyes, the mayor immediately summoned his servant. Find the mercenary group leader to come to the hall of the paper tower and ask him to lead his men to dig down. Tell him that Soft Maple City is saved. We are saved. Go quickly. Chapter 676. Sitting on the chair, the mercenary leader scratched his nails with a dagger as he helplessly thought, they look like a group of rats moving houses. In front of him, there were dozens of warriors who should have been holding halberds, swords, and shields ready to fight the monster to the death. Now, they were using shovels and pickaxes to dig the soil. Then, they pushed small carts in and out of the bottom of the paper tower, moving the soil away. However, due to the tradition of the mercenary group, as long as the employer did not violate the contract, they must obey the employer's command. In other words, the leader could not change the ridiculous order given by the mayor. He could only wait. There's a situation. The soil in the pit is covered with mortar, there seems to be something buried under it. Fortunately, there was this voice, otherwise, the mercenary leader's remaining patience would have been exhausted. He wanted to go over and see what was going on, but the fat mayor, who had been supervising from the side, unexpectedly ran over with an agility that did not match his body size. I'll take care of it, you guys step back a little. As he spoke, the mayor jumped into the mud pit. Under everyone's surprised gaze, he took out a jar from his arms and solemnly placed it on top of the mortar board. Pull me up. Well, this was normal. After being lifted out of the pit by a few mercenaries, the mayor immediately asked everyone to get out of the pit. Then, he took out a flint from an unknown pocket and lit up an oil paper rope that extended from the top of the pot. Chee-chee-chee. Rumble. The small jar was filled with alchemical fire oil, so when it came into contact with the sparks on the oil paper rope, it immediately exploded violently. A few mercenaries were so scared that they even sat on the ground. After the explosion, they found that the mortar board had been blown open, revealing a large hole that allowed people to enter. Still in the lead, the mayor of Soft Maple City took a windproof lantern and took the lead to enter the hole. The mercenary leader gritted his teeth and ordered 2 people to follow him into the hole after the fat mayor. There were some stone steps at the bottom of the hole, which were relatively easy to walk on. Everyone, including the mayor, safely walked to the bottom of the stairs. Their feet touched the solid ground, and their hearts felt a lot more at ease. What the hell is this? With the help of the windproof lantern, they saw something shocking. A small metal fortress with 2 long legs squatting in the middle of a large room that was obviously excavated by humans. Around it, there was a large number of broken and collapsed wooden scaffolding wreckage. Judging from the degree of decay, it had been there for many years. Is this a golem? The mercenary leader, who was quite knowledgeable, proposed a very convincing hypothesis. However, the fat mayor shook his head. He walked to the side of the machine and gently tapped it twice with his finger. Then, he tried to use the small knife he had on him to cut off some metal fragment. However, the sharp steel knife couldn't even leave a scratch on the surface of the machine. This isn't a golem. But even the steel golems are probably not as sturdy as this one. He circled to the bottom of the machine's abdomen and lifted the spiked chains that were obviously designed for anti-climbing. He found a metal ladder hidden behind it. Using both his hands and feet to climb up, the mayor finally found what he was looking for. There was a decoration in the shape of a beast's mouth at the top of the ladder. He mustered up his courage, clenched his hand with the mayor's ring into a fist, and put it into the beast's mouth. Click! He felt that his ring was embedded in some kind of mechanical structure. He tried to twist it, and sure enough, he triggered the mechanism. The abdomen of the machine suddenly opened, and the rolled-up metal ladder rolled down. Go in from here, this thing can be driven. The mayor climbed down shakily. When he pulled his fist out of the beast's mouth suddenly closed. Fortunately, it didn't break his arm. We have to climb in and see what kind of structure is inside. Climbing up the ladder into the machine's abdomen, the mayor didn't move alone this time. Instead, he called the mercenary leader and 2 mercenaries to follow behind him. When he stepped into the metal fortress, he found that the environment inside was actually quite narrow and only enough for one person to move freely. Although the mercenary leader volunteered, the mayor still insisted on checking it out himself. With the limited light of the windproof lantern, the mayor felt something like a seat. He moved his body and sat on it. Then, he found that the lantern in his hand didn't work. As soon as he sat down, a few smoke crystals above the cockpit lit up, emitting a light that was many times brighter than the lantern. He was also able to see the specific situation in the cockpit. In front of him was something like a console. There was a set of joysticks, a dozen dials with unknown functions, and a large number of buttons with unknown functions. Under his feet, he could feel that there were 2 pedals that seemed to be able to be stepped on. Of course, the mayor didn't try to step on them rashly. He had to read the manual first. Yes, that's right. On the control panel, there was a booklet-like reading material. The words Storm Mech Operation Manual were written on the cover, and at the bottom right corner of the cover, there was a small line of words, Honorary Product of the Spanner Family. Although he didn't know what these words meant, it didn't prevent the fat mayor from reading the contents. Gently push the leftmost joystick, start the mech and close the hatch. While reading the words, the mayor began to operate it. When he pushed the joystick, the engine of the entire mech was started, making a roar. Seeing this scene, the mercenary leader immediately wanted to come over to see if the mayor needed help, but the next mechanical creation that was about to topple made them dispel this idea. Gently push the second joystick on the left, the stainless steel gears engage, the engine stops idling and automatically maintains balance. Shocked by the sudden shaking, the mayor hurriedly followed the instructions to restore the mech's balance. The 2 joysticks in the middle can control the legs to move forward. Pay attention to the pedals to adjust the pressure on the knee joint. When he wanted to try for the 3rd time, a yellow button on the dashboard suddenly flashed. He carefully checked the manual and found that it was a warning that the fuel had run out. The yellow light flashing means that the fuel has run out. Follow the following steps. Open the fuel tank in the cabin, according to the sign on the dwarf's mouth. Distribute the light and heavy fuel into it. Seeing this, the mayor finally understood the tradition that the alchemist master didn't elaborate on. The tradition of Soft Maple City is to serve the storm mech. This mech has the ability to wipe out all the monsters under the Emperor's command. In the bottom of his heart, a sudden confidence rose. Chapter 677. Under the continuous bombardment of more than 150 hellroars, the group of blazing shadow beasts that wanted to enter soft Maple City to hunt through the frozen sea was forced back. Under the night sky, the blazing shadow beasts temporarily extinguished the furnace in their bodies. Although they did not attack soft Maple City from the side of the breakwater, on the morning of the second day, those terrifying fellows gathered at the main gate of the city with more raven men, away from the cannons of the Leviathan warship. Very good. Excellent. After rummaging through all the alchemy shops, the mayor finally collected enough light and heavy oil to inject into the storm mech before dawn. After he poured in the oil, this war machine produced by the Wrench family finally had the possibility of unearthing. He was still sitting in the cockpit by himself. According to the familiar steps, he pushed the first and second joystick on the left, and the engine of the storm mech began to operate normally. The behemoth opened its legs and began to stand up little by little. This time, the paper tower really became a paper tower. The sturdy body of the storm mech directly crushed the foundation of the tower. There was no doubt that the paper tower was scattered into ruins. Fortunately, the mayor ordered people to move the documents and files in the tower overnight last night, otherwise, most of the books would have been lost. Dust blocked the front of the observation window, but because of the barrier of the crystal, it did not enter the cockpit. The mayor cautiously referred to the operation process in the manual, paying attention not to put too much pressure on the storm mech's knee joint. He pulled back the left joystick and pushed the joystick forward. The machine took a big step forward in the roar, and inertia firmly tied him to the driver's seat. The right pedal rose a little when the mech stepped into the soft soil, and the mayor felt a little pressure on the soles of his boot. He moved the joystick back and forth, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. The entire cockpit swayed back and forth like a treehouse in a hurricane, shaking with every step. The engine at the back of the machine made a series of hisses, and the hydraulic joints of the storm mech supported the weight of the entire machine, and the pressure gauge swayed greatly with the movement of the joints. As he became more and more proficient in the operation, he could gradually pay attention to the data indicated by all the needles and maintain a stable advance without bumping into any obstacles. The price was the destruction of his mayor's residence. But no matter what, the mayor was still controlling the storm mech to move quickly towards the city gate. The mercenary leader had no choice but to send someone to control the garrison and the Saint's samurai to prevent them from mistaking the war machine for an enemy and launching unnecessary attacks. Although he did not think that those people would have any way to break through the thick outer shell of the storm mech. The screeching of gears filled the cockpit. The left pedal rose again against the fat mayor's foot, and the whole machine tilted forward uneasily. Crap, we're trapped again. The mayor, who was the pilot of the mech, cursed under his breath. He twisted the control stick and made the right leg of the mech take a big step forward. Its knee joint spewed out a large amount of steam like a train whistle. The storm mech swayed left and right like a drunkard, almost falling to the ground. A few seconds later, the mayor finally felt the machine gain a foothold in the snow and mud. The mech maintained a posture of 1 foot forward and 1 foot backward, like a swordsman taking a lunge. He pushed both control sticks forward, his left leg exerted force in the mud, and his right leg pushed forward. The engine let out a sharp whistle, and the metal joints creaked. After a shudder, accompanied by the sound of roots being pulled out of the mud, the storm mech stood up again. The mech stood on one leg for a short while, then continued to move forward. Gradually, he forgot that he was controlling a machine. The steps of the machine felt like his own, and the shaking of the cockpit was just like his body. The sound of gears and valves sounded like the words of the assistants when they were reporting, and he could completely understand the meaning behind it. The mayor even saw the pattern of the needles on the dashboard swinging back and forth. Whenever he raised his leg, a few of the needles would rise to the green area and fall when his leg was straightened. So this was the so-called knee joint pressure. Like a child who had just received a toy, the mayor of Maple City began to forget himself as he walked. He came to the side of the city wall and looked through the observation hole at the same height as the storm mech's waist. The throttle valve is. According to what he saw in the manual, he found a knob, turned it by 2/3, and then pushed the 2 control stick. The pedals were suddenly pushed up, and his knees were sore. The 2 legs of the storm mech stomped heavily on the ground, and then it overcame gravity and leaped high over the city walls of soft Maple City. Ah! The body went from overweight to weightlessness. This novel and exciting experience made the mayor scream out loud. Fortunately, when performing the jump module mission, the storm mech could operate automatically, so his brief absent-mindedness did not affect the landing of the mech. And this war machine, in addition to the surging power, also had a very good shock absorption function, so when it landed, the huge impact did not cause too much damage to the pilot in the cockpit. Bang! Like a meteor falling from the sky, the storm mech smashed into the monsters gathered outside Maple City. 2 blazing shadow beasts and more raven men did not have time to dodge, so they directly became meat paste under the feet of the mech. The storm mech. Seeing the war machine falling from the sky, the dog tamer standing at the back of the monster camp widened his eyes. Although his IQ was the lowest among the raiders, it did not mean that he was brainless. The unique shape of the steel fortress with legs immediately reminded him of the ancient war a long time ago, and his hands could not help but tremble. Retreat. Just as he was about to subconsciously give the order to retreat, the dog tamer immediately remembered that the Emperor was dissatisfied that the blazing shadow beasts did not break into Maple City last night. If he could not achieve some results today, his master would probably send down a thunderous fury and crush him into dust. Those who retreat will die. In order to increase his persuasiveness, the dog tamer waved the long whip in his hand and slapped the backs of the raven men and blazing shadow beasts. He urged these monsters to attack the storm mech. Moreover, in his brain, in addition to the fear of this war machine, he also remembered some of the weaknesses of the mech. Flip this iron shell over, its abdominal armor is relatively weak, blazing shadow beasts use molten bullets. Chapter 678. The mayor shook his head. There was a strong taste of rust in his mouth. This disgusting smell took over all his senses, and he felt as if his brain was soaked in sweet saline. Gradually, his head cleared up. He opened his eyes and saw mottled shadows outside the observation window, which was caused by the monsters constantly jumping up to attack the observation window. Damn it! This thing is so strong, it jumped too far. The fat mayor muttered. He was just excited to try out the storm mech's jumping ability, but who would have thought that he would end up in the middle of a group of monsters outside of Maple City? If he didn't know how strong the machine he was driving was, he would have peed his pants. I have to go back to the city. He looked at the fuel dial and found that the scale was less than 4/5 of the original. The mayor decided to play it safe and not make any mistakes. Turn operation. Well, gently push the one-way lever and quickly cooperate. However, just as he was about to turn the storm mech around, the hound tamer's thunderous whip slammed into the mech's observation window with a smack. Although this war machine could store electricity in a specific battery and was not afraid of electric shocks, the sudden explosion still startled the fat mayor, and his hands trembled involuntarily. He pushed the wrong lever. The storm mech turned half a circle, but because it lost its balance, it fell diagonally to the ground. The heavy war machine crushed many monsters, but seeing this scene, the dog tamer opened his mouth and laughed. It turns out that the short man driving the mech is a novice. Break the door bolt and drag him out. Hearing the order, the blazing shadow beasts and the raven men quickly climbed on top of the overturned storm mech. The raven men put their nails into the gaps of the riveted and welded steel plate armor, trying to pry it up. The blazing shadow beasts opened their mouths and spat out deadly phlegm, molten bullets. They wanted to follow the dog tamer's instructions and melt the mouth-shaped mechanical lock of the storm mech's cockpit, so that they could directly attack the pilot of the mech. Damn it, what should we do? How do we start the battle mode? Although he knew that the storm mech was very sturdy, the fat mayor still panicked when faced with a bunch of monsters who wanted to forcefully dismantle this war machine. Fortunately, he had already memorized the entire Storm Mecha operation manual beforehand. After a moment of careful thought, he remembered how to activate the mecha's battle mode, so he was not completely helpless. He pulled on a rope hanging from the right side of the cockpit, and the auxiliary engine, which was specially designed for combat mode, started up. Compared to the normal mode, the power of this engine was undoubtedly more powerful, and the sound it made was simply deafening. On the right side of the console, a hidden slot suddenly opened, and a handle stretched out. The mayor used his chubby hand to push the handle and found that the handle moved in many directions. This design was actually for the convenience of controlling the weapon module that extended from the outside of the mech. There were 3 types of weapon modules on the storm mech. Because the mayor did not pull the rope hard enough, he only allowed the storm mech to release the most basic attack weapons. Suddenly, the thick surface of the storm mech opened up many cracks, and a dozen spinning wheel saws popped out from the cracks and instantly shredded the bodies of the monsters that clung onto the storm mech. Then, just like the landing after the jump, the storm mech, which had activated the weapon module, also had the function of auto-calibration mode. It was as if it was a living creature. It rolled on the ground once, and then it found the right place to step on the ground with its legs. With a sudden burst of strength, it stood up again. The storm mech was like a spider, extending 8 sets of mechanical arms from its body, and at the end of each arm was a huge sawtooth spinning rapidly. As the pilot rotated the weapon lever, the 8 arms also began to rotate around the body of the mech. Although it looked like there was no order like a crazy demon, in fact, it was very orderly. No matter what angle the blazing shadow beasts and the raven men attacked from, they could not get close to the storm mech. Some of the blazing shadow beasts wanted to attack the belly of the mech according to the command of the dog trainer, but the anti-climbing spikes that swung out gave them a painful lesson. This is not the first generation of the storm mech, but a modified second-generation mech. Looking at the little puppy that was beaten to a pulp, the dog trainer immediately recalled his memories of the ancient war. I must report to the Emperor and tell him that the situation has changed. Thinking of this, he immediately used the whip to wrap around a blazing shadow beast, and then put a finger on the top of its head. Dark green flames suddenly gushed out from the eyes of the modified monster, and its body began to tremble non-stop. The dog trainer transferred his will into the monster's mind, and when he raised his hand, the blazing shadow beast ran in the direction of the protruding point. After doing all this, the dog trainer waved the whip, which made a crisp paw sound. Fortunately, the pilot is not familiar with the storm mech. The lava armor on his body began to melt. Otherwise, this war machine would really be unbeatable. As a general, although the dog trainer was originally only a half-orc, after being modified by the flesh of the burnt sacrifice demon, he already had some of the abilities of the top inferno creatures. Through the stimulation of the hellfire, he quickly changed into a half-inferno, half-lava creature. Not long after, a giant of more than 20 feet tall appeared on the battlefield. At this time, the dog trainer's lower body had turned into a pile of flowing lava, and his upper body had turned into the appearance of the burnt sacrifice demon. He roared at the sky, and the huge bat wings on his back flapped violently. The dog trainer was like a cannonball, ignoring the spinning wheel saws that scratched his body, and in an instant, he pounced on the storm mech. Lava dripped from the lower body, and the surface of the storm mech's armor turned red, like a cooked crab. What the dog trainer was doing now was to raise his fist like a battering ram, and punch after punch to break the crab shell of the storm mech. Thump, 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 thump. Despite the fact that the mecha's cockpit had excellent shock-absorbing capabilities, the Fat Mayor still felt the violent vibrations coming from inside. His head was starting to feel a little dizzy. Moreover, without looking at the temperature indicator on the dashboard, he could feel the high temperature warning while sweating profusely. What should I do? Right, the Storm Mech still has 2 combat modules. Chapter 679. That thing is really exciting. Keys, who was standing on the top floor of the ship's stern, heard the words of the ogre Neru behind him. He did not even need to turn around to know that the ogre's eyes were burning with anticipation. It's a pity that the pilot is not very good at it. Shay, the genius craftsman, was also watching the mech battle outside the city, and he inferred something else from the appearance of the mech. It's a waste of the mechanical goblin's good craftsmanship. Although he did not know much about the engineering goblins, as a weapon master, Neru deeply agreed with Shay's evaluation of the Fat Mayor who controlled the Storm Mech. Let's find some parts later and assemble a new mech. Let me try. In fact, Keys was also a little tempted. After all, to be able to pilot a mech was definitely on the wish list of every man. Even after becoming a megalosaurus, this little romance still did not fade away. We'll each get one later. Hearing this, Shay could not help but knock on the head of his sanctioner body. He knew that he had work to do in the future. Unlike these guys who were fantasizing about piloting the mech, the Fat Mayor who was piloting the mech at this time was suffering. He was now eager to get out of the narrow and hot cockpit as soon as possible. The vibration caused by the dog tamer's continuous attacks made him feel like his stomach was overturned. No. He resisted the urge to vomit as his brain worked quickly. I have to quickly activate the second combat module. Otherwise, even if I don't get roasted, I'll faint in this cockpit. The Fat Mayor once again pulled the leather rope hanging down from the right side of the cockpit. He pulled hard, and the leather rope stretched a little further. The joints of the Storm Mech suddenly discharged a large amount of gas. The war machine quickly squatted down, and the 2 thick metal legs suddenly retracted into the mech's fortress-like body. Woo woo woo! A sound several times louder than the sound of a train suddenly rang out. The monsters who were slightly closer to the mech almost had their eardrums pierced. The Storm Mech, which had turned into a metal ball, began to roll forward. The dog tamer, who was lying on top of the mech, was like an obstacle, mercilessly crushed by the wheels of the Storm Mech. Even with a semi-elemental body, the hound tamer was still severely injured. His upper body, which resembled a burnt offering fiend, had almost turned into a piece of paper. His sternum, horns, and skull had all shattered into pieces, sinking into the mud formed from flesh and blood. When the evil crows saw this, they all had thoughts of retreating. As for the blazing shadow beasts, they all ran to the side of the tribulation general and let out waves of wails. What's there to cry about? The dog tamer was still a calamity general, so he wouldn't die so easily. The lava on his lower body flowed into the swamp of flesh and blood, and his broken body began to regenerate rapidly. Attack Soft Maple City, leave that mech to me. I don't believe there's another mech in this city that can be used. Calamity General, who had regained his vitality, gritted his teeth and ordered his monster army to attack Soft Maple City. There's no other way. I can only use magic to deal with this storm mech. The hound tamer stood up and extended his palm towards the war machine that was turning around and preparing to crush him again. His mouth began to mutter a spell. Powerful breath of the rust monster. The obscure spell gradually took shape. As he successfully cast the spell, a large amount of yellowish-brown cone-shaped gas quickly spewed out of his mouth and hit the surface of the storm mech directly. This kind of spell, which was taught by the Emperor, was widely used by the Calamity General in the ancient war. It was very good against the steel weapons and various war machines of the dwarf and human coalition forces. However, the Hound Tamer knew that his spell could only affect the storm mech for a short while. This was because the mech's armor defense mechanism had a special anti-rust coating. After the armor was rusted, the special alchemy coating inside would penetrate the surface of the armor, and then the spell would no longer have any effect on the mech in a short period of time. If there was more than one mech on the battlefield, the Calamity General in the ancient war would be restrained and unable to get rid of the affected mech during the time when the rust spell took effect. Then, it would not be long before that mech became the vanguard of the counterattack. If there were other Calamity General with superior spellcasting ability, it would be fine. However, for the Hound Tamer, who had limited spellcasting ability and usually used physical attacks as his fighting style, the steel lump, that had no weakness was completely his nightmare. Therefore, he did not use the spell at the beginning. He had just been testing to see if there was a second storm mech that could be used in Soft Maple City. Now, he came to a negative conjecture, so he decisively used the powerful breath of the rust monster, wanting to end the battle in one fell swoop. As long as he could dismantle this mech, the following battle could be regarded as a great victory even if Soft Maple City was not destroyed. After all, the storm mech was not cheap. The Ramsey people were not extravagant enough to list it as the standard equipment of the army. Destroying one would definitely hurt the forces of the rebellion against the Emperor. What's wrong with that thing? Didn't it still move just now? The reconnaissance team hiding in the woods outside the city looked at the scene of the mech fighting the Calamity General in the distance outside Soft Maple City. One of them saw that the storm mech had stopped moving and could not help but ask. They were the reconnaissance team of the Four-City Alliance Army. They set out from Juniper Village to investigate the situation in Soft Maple City. But now, it seemed that Soft Maple City was dealing with the monsters with ease. Although they did not know that the one who led the monsters to attack the city was not the Emperor, but just a Calamity General, from the terrifying appearance of the Hound Tamer, the reconnaissance team did not think that he was just an ordinary soldier. However, such a terrible monster was almost killed by a war machine that jumped out of the city. This group of reconnaissance teams could not help but have a great interest in the storm mech. The one who led this team was none other than the leader of the rebels, Harrow. The one who had just asked the question was a senior battlefield observer from Emerald Wood City. Hearing the other party's doubts, and thinking of the yellow-brown cone-shaped gas that the terrible lava giant, they did not know the Hound Tamer, had just spewed out, he immediately took out a small note from his belt, licked it on his tongue, and then shook it twice. The originally white piece of paper slowly turned red. So that's how it is, Rake silently thought. Chapter 680. The test paper turned red, and Rake confirmed his conjecture. Calamity had just used magic to corrode the war machine, and its parts might have been damaged, so it had to stop charging. Sure enough, only magic can defeat magic. This thought made Rake feel a little lost. As an alchemist, he could certainly mix some alchemy potions to simulate the effect of magic. However, when facing a tribulation general, it was still unknown how useful those little tricks would be. The storm machine that appeared outside Soft Maple City was also an enemy of the rebels, but it represented the hope of the Ramsey people to defeat the ancient slave masters. To be honest, Rake didn't want it to be destroyed here. But he also knew that now was not the time to be sad. We can go back now. It seems like the Calamity General has already defeated the war machine, but it might take some time to dismantle it. Soft Maple City still has a chance to evacuate some people. The leader of the rebels ordered the scouting team. However, not long after he judged the situation of the battlefield, led his men into the forest and returned to Juniper Village, the storm machine that had been shut down began to deform again. Fortunately, the mayor who piloted the storm machine had memorized all the contents of the storm machine operation manual in advance. When the storm machine began to rust, he immediately thought of a solution. Unlock the third battle module of the Storm Machine. Looking at the dog trainer who was walking towards him step by step, the mayor grabbed the leather rope with both hands and pulled with all his strength. The battle engine was instantly adjusted to the third gear, and more surging energy gushed out from it, activating every part inside the Storm Machine. The indicator of the fuel gauge on the control panel in front of the mayor immediately dropped by more than a third. High-temperature electric arcs surged on the Storm Machine, and dense small holes appeared on the surface of the armor. A large amount of light green oil seeped out of the holes. As long as this oil was contaminated with rusty metal, it would immediately undergo a chemical reaction to remove the rust. Just as the dog trainer had judged, this storm mech was not a cheap product. It was a high-grade product specially made by the Wrench family munitions factory for ancient Ramsey gnomes. Every storm mecha such as this was installed with a small amount of precious memory alloy that was traded from the Elder Axis, the arsenal where the Wonder Craftsman once mass-produced the Reapers. Not only could it record the enemy's various forms of attack, but it could also automatically analyze the most effective way to counteract such an attack. Apart from that, the goblin engineers of the Wrench family also offered all kinds of strange items that could be used to decorate the mother of all ants of the Fermi ant race in exchange for the secretions of the ant nest. They also traded with the green jade garden built by the Yakong god race in the mechanical realm in Mountain Paradise and obtained the construct plant gels. They mixed these magical materials together and made all kinds of protective coatings for the storm mechanical armor. Normally, these precious consumables would not be used. Only when the storm mechanical armor was fatally damaged by spells and the pilot activated the Level 3 combat module, would the coating materials be activated by the special radiation energy emitted by the engine. Then, according to the judgment made by the memory alloy, different coatings would be released to solve the current problems. For example, after the storm mechanical armor was hit by the dog trainer's strong breath of the rust monster, the light green oil that was specially used to reverse the situation of rust surged all over the storm mechanical armor, making this war machine immune to this spell effect for a period of time. In other words, the storm mechanical armor had regained its vitality at this moment. As long as there was enough fuel and the engine did not stop, it could continue to fight. Damn it! Seeing the light green oil dripping all over the storm mechanical armor, the dog trainer immediately thought of the reason. In the ancient war, because this general lacked more spells to attack, he had been tortured by the storm mechanical armor that was revived with full health on the battlefield. The memory of being pressed to the ground and rubbed against it was really deep in his memory, and it had not faded at all for thousands of years. So, the general turned his head and ran in the direction of Soft Maple City. The Emperor ordered him to attack Soft Maple City and rescue Soul Search, who had been captured. Just now, because of his prediction of the pilot, although the mayor was indeed not a qualified pilot, he really had the Storm Mechanical Armor Operation Manual memorized backward. There was a problem, causing the Storm Mechanical Armor to change its main target. But looking at the current situation, the Storm Mech had already activated the third-level combat module. If the dog tamer continued to stubbornly go against it, then not only would it be impossible to beat this war machine, but it would also likely suffer a tragic beating. Rather than that, he might as well plunge into Soft Maple City. Even if he could not take down the city, even if he could not rescue Soul Search, at least the storm mechanical armor would not dare to use such a tyrannical battle mode to attack him in the city. Otherwise, the dog trainer would certainly fail and even die again, but Soft Maple City would probably not continue to exist. At that time, without this supply base and the regular supply of fuel, the storm mechanical armor, no matter how powerful it was just a toothless tiger, at the mercy of the generals. And his failure this time would not be blamed too much by the Emperor. However, not only did the battle enlighten the dog trainer's mind, it also allowed the fat mayor to grow a little. Although he was still a not very skilled mech pilot at this moment, he could roughly determine the purpose of the general in front of him to attack Soft Maple City. We must not let him enter the city. The Storm mechanical armor has activated the Level 3 combat module. If we fight with him in Soft Maple City, the entire city will probably be destroyed. Without the support of various materials in the city, this Storm mechanical armor will become a one-off consumable. Looking at the fuel gauge, the needle showed that there was less than half of the fuel left. The mayor gritted his teeth and quickly pushed the 2 joysticks in front of him. The Storm mechanical armor's 2 legs, which had been retracted into its body, stretched out on the ground, and the war machine immediately leaped into the air. Then, the armor in front of the Storm mechanical armor revealed a brand new launch port. Hunter's tongue. As if to encourage him, the mayor shouted the name of a rather Chunibu move written in the operation manual. Accompanied by a loud bang, a thick bolt with a chain instantly shot out from the launch port. With a poof, the bolt pierced through the dog trainer's shoulder blade, and the huge thrust even threw the general to the ground. After hitting the target, the gears inside the Storm mechanical armor turned the winch and pulled the general to itself. At the same time, a large amount of light blue liquid flowed along the chain into the dog trainer's wound. In order to stop the general's movement, the mayor had to once again consume the coating material that he could not replenish at the moment. He injected a strong anesthetic that was specially used on the general and could temporarily weaken their strong physique into the dog trainer's body. As the chain was pulled, the 8 mechanical arms with wheel saws that appeared before once again appeared beside the Storm mechanical armor. Buzz buzz buzz, chi chi chi. Chapter 681. The appearance of the Storm mech caused a new change in the situation. After seeing the dog tamer dismembered into pieces and only the head of the blazing shadow beasts desperately brought back, the people of Soft Maple City seemed to have found their backbone. As the pilot of the Storm mech, the fat mayor was in the limelight for a while. All the candidates who wanted to run for the next mayor had become deserted during this time, and the previous group of supporters seemed to have completely forgotten about them. The full alliance of the Ramsey people will start with us. Soft Maple, Greenwood, Red Pine, Black Willow, and Blue Maple will form an unbreakable alliance. The mayor of Red Pine City bowed to the mayor of Soft Maple City and said, "Together, we will resist the awakening of the Emperor." Previously, after the reconnaissance team returned to Juniper Village, the alliance of the 4 cities immediately sent a special envoy, the mayor of Red Pine City, as the representative of the other mayors, to take on the role of the leader of the envoy group and rush to Soft Maple City. Originally, his purpose of coming was to ask the mayor of Soft Maple City to issue a notice of evacuation. However, when he saw the wreckage of the dog tamer outside the city and the Storm mech standing in the mayor's residence, he immediately drafted another agreement. After all, based on the current situation, Soft Maple City no longer seemed to be the one that needed to be saved. I agree with your suggestion. The Emperor and his generals are the enemy of all Ramsey people. The fat mayor of Soft Maple City couldn't help but boast. However, his mind was still clear. He knew that a city and a Storm mech alone could not resist the power of the Emperor. The alliance of the 5 cities is imperative, and this alliance will continue to be promoted. Hearing the affirmative answer, the mayor of Red Pine City did not immediately cheer. This was something he had expected. The more important question was what the mayor of Soft Maple City wanted. That was the prerequisite for the establishment of the alliance. First of all, I want to thank everyone for coming to help. Even if Soft Maple City has a strong and sufficient defense force, everyone who is willing to help us is a treasure. However, just like the proverb, a snake without a head cannot move, the 5 cities have united together. In order to twist all the forces into a rope, we need a unified leader. Sir, currently, Red Pine, Black Willow, Blue Maple, and Emerald Wood have already elected Green from Emerald Wood City as the leader of the alliance. If you bring your city and join us, we will have 5 people, which is just enough to form a council to vote on decisions. Mayor Hong Song was a shrewd old man. He naturally knew what the mayor was planning, but he didn't have to accept everything from the beginning. Seeing that Mayor Hong Song rejected his wishes, the mayor of Soft Maple didn't seem to be offended. You just told me that the 4-city alliance army has already arrived near Soft Maple City. With so many people marching together, there weren't many villages and fortresses that could be used as garrisons. Now, where is the alliance army stationed? Can we go and discuss this with the mayors? Discuss instead of face-to-face. The fat mayor's choice of words was very precise. If they were to meet face-to-face, they would have to meet face-to-face. But the discussion could also be carried out while sitting in the storm mech. Of course, if he wanted to reactivate the storm mech, he would have to wait for at least 2 weeks. The alchemists in the city needed this time to refine the light and heavy oil. However, Mayor Hong Song didn't know this. His face suddenly became a little nervous, and his mood began to become complicated. However, before the more awkward conversation could take place, another more important matter grabbed the mayor's attention. He ended the negotiation in advance and arranged for the delegation to settle down in the post house. The dwarves are coming with the icebreaker. After reading the copper tube message from the attendant, the smug mayor of Soft Maple couldn't help but frown. Why are they coming at this time? Does it have anything to do with me digging out the storm mech? On the sea north of Soft Maple City, a pointed ship made entirely of metal was moving at full speed. Its hard and sharp bow was moving on the ice. Relying on its own weight, the icebreaker crushed the ice and then moved forward for a while. In this way, the dwarf icebreaker bit by bit gnawed a passage on the frozen sea and drove to the jetty next to Soft Maple City. Then, the ship anchored. The ship didn't move into the mooring because the Leviathan was there. For safety reasons, the dwarf icebreaker didn't want to get close to the behemoth. After the ship stopped, the icebreaker only lowered an ice sled. Even for dwarves, this means of transportation was a little too crowded to carry 6 passengers at the same time. I'm going to start, Daraport. The dwarf pilot sitting at the end of the ice sled shouted. Daraport, who led the team, made a no-problem gesture, and the vehicle began to move on the ice. The 6 dwarves were a typical configuration of an adventure team. The leader was the illusionist Daraport, who was also responsible for external affairs. The remaining 5 members were a rogue, a monk, and 3 spear and shield warriors. They were a special investigation team sent by Dwarf Island to Soft Maple City to investigate the 2 unusual events of the Emperor Resurgence and the Storm Mech unearthed. In addition, there was a dwarf mechanical chocobo cavalry unit and 3 steam turbine tanks on the icebreaker. They were waiting for Daraport's call and were ready to land in Soft Maple City to solve the problem. That ship next to it is really big. It doesn't look like a Ramsey creation at all. The dwarf wanderer sitting on the ice sledge observed the Leviathan with a pair of binoculars hanging on his chest. He said to his companion next to him, "It looks like a ship produced in the Dwarf Island shipyard. It doesn't have so many sails, but it does have a tall chimney." The one listening to him was a spear and shield warrior. "Then when you go back, you can go up and see if you can find the nameplates left by the craftsman." Out of his understanding of his old friend, the spear and shield warrior knew that as long as he instigated him, the other party would most likely do something. But you have to be careful. Don't go into their treasure vault and get locked by the treasure chest. Ha! While the dwarves were quarreling, Quess, who was standing on the stern of the ship, cast his gaze towards them. The Ramsey gnomes aren't like their other cousins with elven blood. Their ears aren't as sharp. Their bodies are slightly stronger, and the 2 spear and shield warriors seem to have undergone some degree of mechanical transformation. There are metal parts in their limbs. Chapter 682. When you stared into the abyss stared back at you. While the dwarves were sizing up the Leviathan, the owner of the ship was also observing them. There was no doubt that the latter's eyes were much better than the former's. As it was the first time that Keyes had seen Ramsay's dwarves, he could not help but use spells and other means to observe them from all angles. He came to the conclusion that the dwarves in the Ramsay plane were a little abnormal, not like normal dwarves. The dwarves were a distant relative of the elves, and they had originally lived with the elves in the wild. It was colorful, green, and full of passion. Many years ago, the main god of the dwarves, Garl Dazzlinggold, had discovered this race. Under his leadership, the ancient dwarves had left the kingdom and spread to various planes of the multiverse. Even so, the dwarves had never completely abandoned their elven roots, nor had they completely drifted to secular culture. Although the dwarves were no longer true elves, their elven lineage was still revealed through their outstanding magic talent, willful nature, and special perspective on everything in the world. Dwarves could have the same behavioral motives and concerns as other races, but the driving force that drove them was a strong, even strange and absurd passion in the eyes of other races. They could risk their lives to taste the food on the giant's table, or challenge the bottom of the bottomless abyss in order to break their own drilling record, or run to an ancient red dragon to tell him a joke at the risk of being roasted alive. For the dwarves, these achievements were the same as developing new technologies, obtaining wealth comparable to that of a country, or overthrowing powerful evil forces. They were family traditions that they should be proud of. Garl Dazzlinggold especially appreciated the passion of his people and named it the inner drive of the dwarves. He liked such energetic dwarves, and the dwarves would use their own vitality to please the main god. In Keyes's opinion, similar to the dwarves in some other planes, the dwarves of Ramsay should have a tradition in scientific research. Otherwise, they would not have invented so many mechanical creations and discovered so many alchemy formulas in history. Of course, this did not mean that the dwarves in this plane did not have other choices. In many dwarven worlds that worshipped science and technology, there were many dwarves who did not want to be scientists and engineers. Their gods had never objected to it either. However, after careful observation, he found that Ramsay's dwarves seemed to be lacking something. Although they also had many technological creations, it seemed that the souls of the dwarves were not as agile. Compared to the gnomes of other planes, who were traditionally engaged in scientific research, Ramsay's gnomes seemed to lack subjective creativity. In other words, they seemed to lack the intrinsic drive of gnomes that Gail Shimmer advocated. Even if Keyes could not see the whole picture, he still benefited from the detailed research he had done on the dwarves of the Ramsay plane when he was investigating STEM. Therefore, he came to the conclusion that Ramsay's dwarves were gradually deviating from tradition, and their creativity was gradually being castrated. The reason for this may be that the stable financial system has provided for thousands of years of good living. It may also be that STEM's appearance caused more Ramsay's dwarves to divert a lot of their attention to virtual games. Therefore, their technological inventions seemed to be stagnant. The mechanical chocobo, which had been perfected more than 1,000 years ago, was still in use today. The steam turbine tank, which was invented more than 1,000 years ago, was still in service today. It was simply too stable for the dwarves. No wonder the god of virtual games took such a big risk. I'm afraid he's now in a dilemma. Suddenly, Keyes had a flash of inspiration. He seemed to have guessed the possible reason why STEM took the initiative to participate in the Blood War. With the continuous promotion of his game, the souls of the Ramsay Plains dwarves have begun to gradually lose their vitality. The faster the virtual games are promoted, the lower the unit value of the Ramsay's dwarves' faith will become. STEM is now most likely in a difficult situation. And this was indeed the case. As the original god of Ramsay, STEM took less than 200 years to develop to a weak divine power. For a god, it could be said that his progress was astonishing. However, in the 100 years since then, his path had become narrower and narrower. Most of the time, he even had to be vigilant against the loss of faith caused by the decline of the dwarf population, which led to the risk of his divinity being downgraded. It was for this reason that Stim took the initiative to attract believers of other races. He went to other planes to compete with gods like Kord for certain priesthoods so that they could be included in the scope of the virtual games. He also went to the Abyss to take part in the Blood War. However, the problems of the gods still had to be solved by the gods themselves. The ordinary Ramsey dwarves still did not realize that their behavior was different from that of normal dwarves in other planes. They still did things their own way. On this point, the investigators sent by Dwarf Island were incisively and vividly demonstrating. When the ice sleigh drove to the breakwater, the driver in charge of driving the vehicle pressed a button on the control panel, and the vehicle changed into a different style. The blades and tracks were retracted from the support frame below, and 2 4-wheels replaced them. The vehicle dragged the dwarves from the shore to the mayor's residence. It went on a rampage all the way, not caring about whether there were pedestrians or stalls on the street. In the face of the abuse of the citizens, the dwarven investigators on the vehicle responded with ridicule as a counterattack. Although the 6 of them were going to the mayor's residence, they did not want to pay a visit to the mayor of Soft Maple City. The gnomes driving the vehicle smashed open the door of the mayor's residence. Dara Potter, who was the leader, directly cast an illusion on the mercenaries who wanted to stop them, causing those dizzy fellows to punch and kick each other, fighting fiercely. Their target was the storm mech that was parked in the courtyard. The midget who was driving the car drifted and stopped the car beside the mech. With the help of the monks, Dara Potter quickly reached the top of the storm mech. The illusionist took out a cylindrical key from his pocket and directly stuffed it into the beast-mouth-shaped keyhole used to open the storm mech. As he chanted a specific incantation, the key immediately changed shape and tightly blocked the keyhole. After doing this, Dara Potter clapped his hands and breathed a sigh of relief. Before they set off from Dwarf Island, the master craftsman had told him to control the storm mech before he started the investigation, and then he could interrogate the human mayor. Therefore, as soon as their investigation team arrived at Soft Maple City, they rushed to the location of the storm mech as fast as lightning. Using the secret control key, passed down from ancient times, they temporarily locked the storm mech and did not let it be activated again. However, whether it was Dara Potter or the master craftsman, they did not realize a problem. Normal dwarves who were traditional in science and technology would never think of controlling a technological product and not letting it be used by others. Even if the technological product could be a dangerous weapon, a normal dwarf would most likely choose to invent something even more dangerous to defeat the original product. Chapter 683. It Can't Be Wrong. He doesn't have many coins left. Darport pulled out a 7, spread it open, threw away a 3, and stared at the only card in his hand. "Why do you say that?" the dwarf wanderer called him by the illusionist asked. "Every time you have no money, your face looks like a corpse, and you can't even open your eyes." A spear and shield warrior joined in the ridicule. Ha 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 ha, looking at the dwarf investigation team playing cards, the mayor of Soft Maple could not help but feel speechless. They had come here, defeated 4 or 5 mercenaries, and angered at least 3 or 4 strong men who were used to living on the edge of a knife, and now they were still in the mood to play cards. In fact, if he knew what the dwarves had done, he was afraid that the dwarves would have offended one more person. Distinguished guests of Dwarf Island, the mayor, who did not want to wait any longer, finally took the initiative to ask, "Has Dwarf Island received a message from Soft Maple City?" The Emperor had already awakened and was plotting something on that mountaintop. Did the Dwarf Island not send out more troops? I mean, if you only came to Soft Maple City, I'm afraid that the manpower is still a bit stretched. Everyone, our host can't wait any longer. Daraport threw the cards aside. He was definitely going to lose this round, so he wanted to talk to the fat mayor to get rid of the money. He's not even willing to give us the time to play around. The mayor did not pay attention to him, but quietly waited for him to answer his doubts. Seeing this, Daraport smiled and flipped the card table in the midst of his companion's curses. We have received information. More of the Dwarf Island's reinforcements were in that icebreaker. However, we are an investigation team, and we are here to find out the situation first. What do you want to know? The mayor of Soft Maple City asked in return. Daraport walked in front of him. Everything, the dwarf illusionist said concisely, pointing to the storm mech standing behind him. Who discovered this ancient war machine, and how did the Emperor and his minions awaken? The master craftsman of Dwarf Island specifically asked us to investigate this matter. He didn't ask, how do you want to investigate? Based on the fat mayor's understanding of the dwarves, if they already had a goal in mind, they would definitely come up with more than one plan before carrying it out. To ordinary humans, the dwarf's brain circuit was really hard to understand, which was why he didn't want to waste time asking questions that he couldn't possibly understand. What do you need us to do? What I mean is... He purposely emphasized the word us. After careful consideration, he told her about the alliance of cities. The few cities near Soft Maple City, Red Pine, Emerald Wood, Black Willow, and Lawn Maple have formed an alliance. I have just agreed to join on behalf of Soft Maple. So, if you want to investigate the whole story of the Emperor's revival, we can definitely provide you with more detailed information. After all, the activities of the monsters have long been. Hearing the mayor of Soft Maple mention the alliance of several Ramsey city-states, Daraport's expression froze, and his button-sized nose twitched twice. When did you guys form an alliance? Why didn't Dwarf Island receive any notice? Just now, the fat mayor replied with some self-restraint. The arrogant dwarf investigator became impatient, and he seemed to feel that he had won back a step. The Emperor's revival is already set in stone. The monsters under his command have already invaded Soft Maple City's territory for many days. If the cities don't unite, I'm afraid we won't be able to hold on for long. That's what we need to investigate, Daraport shouted in a sharp voice. Without sufficient evidence, how can you determine that the Emperor has awakened? Perhaps the ones entrenched at the protrusion are just a group of rebels, ordinary monsters. Originally, he wanted to say rebels. The Ramsey dwarves often believed that the rebels of the human city-states were the culprits behind all the chaos, and that all the bad situations were caused by these disruptors. However, when the dwarves' icebreaker sailed into Soft Maple City's harbor, they did see some wreckage belonging to the monsters on the ice. Therefore, he had to change his word. Let's go and take a look at the protrusion. After arguing with the fat mayor for a while, Daraport immediately called out to the members of his investigation team. Check if the situation there is true, or if someone is deliberately causing trouble. Before leaving, the master craftsman of Dwarf Island had reminded him that the purpose of this investigation of Soft Maple City was to control the storm mech and prevent the Ramsey humans from casually using this advanced war weapon, bought by the ancient dwarves. Another important task was to use attacks to test whether the Emperor had really escaped, or if it was just a gimmick made up by the Ramsey people. For this reason, not only were their investigation team equipped with the professions of a standard adventurer team, but they also had several magical items as tools to test the waters. Daraport could not wait to personally test whether the fat mayor's words were true. However, he had never thought that since he was in such a hurry, why would he organize his team members to play a card game just now? Perhaps this lack of self-control and concentration was the problem of the Ramsey dwarf. But they did not realize this at all. Instead, they thought that this was the normal working state of the dwarf race. Now, with Daraport's order, the group of grumpy little brothers immediately had an upper limit. They got on the vehicle that they had used to hurry on their journey. After starting the engine, they drove towards the city gate of soft Maple City at lightning speed. Fortunately, the ones guarding the city gate were the Steel Fork Battalion, who had loose military discipline, and not the sacred warriors of Haones who liked to be stubborn, or the mercenaries who had a grudge with the dwarf investigation team. Otherwise, another fierce internal strife would have broken out in the city. It's really a strong spell fluctuation. Sitting in the front of the vehicle, Dara Potter had been examining a detection instrument in his hand after they left the city gate. The pointer on the instrument was swaying non-stop. There's indeed a Calamity General-level spellcaster. Gradually, the illusionist suddenly felt that it was a little too hasty to rashly investigate. After thinking about it, he took out a handful of fluorite powder from a small pocket on his body and then sprinkled it on the dwarf's vehicle. Soon, the entire car, including the 6 members of the midget investigation team in the car, disappeared in an instant. This should be enough. Chapter 684. Shirgu felt uncomfortable staying in the incubation site. He was a hunter, not a guard. However, the Emperor ordered him to do so, because his wife, Soul Search, Dog Tamer, Fool's View, Incarnation, and Leopard Man were all not around him, and the remaining Calamity Generals had not been found and awakened yet. Therefore, even the ancient ruler of Ramsey had to condescend to personally resurrect the Dog Tamer, who had been cut off by the Storm Reaver with only a head left. In this way, it was not too much to ask Shirgu to guard. The Emperor stood next to the round table in the center of the incubation site, where the statue of Hierones was originally placed. Now, it had been temporarily changed into an experimental console. He placed all the materials one by one around the Dog Tamer's head. The molted skin of the horned viper, the sacks of the toad, and a fresh headless corpse of the blazing shadow beast. Counting silently, the Emperor grabbed a blazing shadow beast that was too close, cut off the poor beast's head with his huge claws, and burned it to ashes with black flames. A dark spell came out of his mouth, and the materials slowly approached the Dog Tamer's head, as if they were pulled by invisible hands. The Calamity General's heads slowly rose, and under the bonding of other materials, they quickly pressed against the blazing shadow beast's body. Red lightning suddenly appeared and crackled non-stop, as if it was threading a needle through the glued corpses. After a while, the body slowly came to life. The Dog Tamer opened his eyes. "My lord!" A group of grumpy young men drove from soft Maple City to the protrusion. Dara Potter carefully maintained the illusion spell. Along the way they saw all kinds of monsters, raven men climbing on the cliffs, blazing shadow beasts wandering and patrolling, drooping horse heads hanging on the branches, horse-headed water monsters whispering and talking in the frozen shallows. There seemed to be a lot of monsters here. The dwarf rogue communicated with his companions in sign language. Different kinds of monsters. Without a commander, they certainly can't live in peace here. "Shut up, we just want to find the commander." Darapot glared at him, but he also explained with sign language. The master craftsman needs to find out if the Calamity is behind this, or if the Emperor is preparing for revenge. According to the records in the ancient books, that guy has been firmly sealed by the great Gaul Dazzling Gold. There is no reason for him to be suddenly awakened. Due to the concealment of the illusion, the monsters did not notice them driving the car. It didn't take long for the gnome investigators to reach the bottom of the protrusion. For the rest of the journey, they could not rely on transportation. Darport ordered his team members to form a defensive formation. The spear and shield warriors lined up on the periphery, the monks were ready to attack, the rogues set up many traps around them, and Daraport, the illusionist, was ready to cast spells. The master craftsman said that as long as I launch this thing, the leader of the dwarf investigation team took out a firecracker and lit the fuse with a lighter. If the Emperor is here, he will definitely run out. After saying this, the firecracker in his hand shot up into the sky and turned into a firework. Moreover, as the firework bloomed, a shrill sound resounded through the sky, and could even be heard in the distant soft maple city. "Is it delicious? Gall-dazzling gold." Hearing this voice, the eyes of the Emperor, who had just resurrected the dog trainer, turned into a raging flame, as if something had begun to burn in his heart. His giant hand, which only had 4 fingers, opened, and a light screen made of dark green flames appeared in his palm. Through this light curtain, the Emperor saw a group of gnomes at the bottom of the protrusion using illusions to hide their figures. "Clean up those scum for me," the Emperor yelled at the dog trainer. Just like those people who love to show off what they lack, the ancient Emperor Ramsay, who was humiliated by the gnome god's joke prop, was now very concerned about his face. Therefore, although he was burning with anger, he still did not do it himself, but let the calamity under his command serve him. After receiving his master's order, the dog trainer immediately carried it out. He did not even have time to change back from the blazing shadow beast's figure and rushed directly out of the monster hatchery. Sharp claws extended from his strong limbs, and he quickly ran on the cliff of the protrusion as if he was running on flat ground, toward the gnome investigators who were looking forward to a response. "It should be coming for us." Potter's eyes were very sharp. From afar, he saw the blazing shadow beast with a burning head on its head, so he immediately shouted to his companions, "Be careful of the enemy! It shouldn't be the Emperor, let's test his strength." The dog trainer still maintained his previous habits. He was keen on hand-to-hand combat and did not like to use magic. The other heart in his chest, like an engine, emitted a dazzling red light. In the state of overload, he had far more speed and strength than ordinary blazing shadow beasts. What a fast speed! Potter frowned. Without waiting for the captain's order, several spear and shield warriors took the initiative to shoot at the dog trainer based on their experience. "We must not let that monster get close to us. We are definitely at a disadvantage if we engage in hand-to-hand combat with it." Compared with many races, the physique of the gnomes was actually relatively weak. Even if they became combat professionals, they did not necessarily have any advantages. They accepted this very calmly, without any inferiority complex at all. In order to make up for this shortcoming, the gnomes developed some professional variants with their own racial characteristic. For example, the spear and shield warrior was somewhat similar to the gun warrior. They used shields, advanced firearms, and a variety of bullets to fight. A spear and shield warrior usually carried at least 2 firearms, and different firearms used different bullet. When dealing with enemies like the dog trainer, who moved very fast, these gnome warriors all changed to repeating rifles. "Eat our bullets, stupid big dog." With a slightly frivolous ridicule, the 4 strong gnome shield warriors pulled the triggers almost at the same time. Their guns were now loaded with silent bullet. There was no smoke, and the gunshots were still very soft, but the firing rate was very high. Puff, 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 puff. The continuous strafing caused the bullets to cross into a barrage. The dog trainer could not dodge, and the body of this general burst out a little blood. However, the damage caused by these silent bullets was only so. On the body that looked like a blazing shadow beast, dense bone plates gradually replaced the original skin. Except for a few joints in the front half of the body, all the parts had been covered by the bone plates, and the bullets could not break through at all. Chapter 685. Use heavy impact bullets. Seeing this, the pygmy spear and shield warriors immediately switched to another gun and used another type of bullet against the hound tamer. Bang, 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 the thick barrels were stuffed with bullets about the thickness of their wrists. As they pulled the trigger, heavy impact bullets were constantly ejected from the muzzle. However, because this type of gun was a single-shot pump, it could not form an effective suppressive fire. They could only rely on the tacit understanding they had in the past, one after another, and try not to let the attack have any stagnation. In fact, in addition to the spear and shield warriors launching long-range attacks, the remaining pygmy investigators were not idle either. The monk under the foot had already set up his stance. As long as the enemy rushed over, he could immediately rush over and use foot trip on them. The pygmy rogue put his hand on the remote control, ready to activate the several traps he had set up at any time. Potter had also prepared his hand gestures, and his illusion was ready. He was just waiting for the hound tamer to crash into them. However, what they did not expect was that the hound tamer, a monster who had been maintaining a reckless posture, suddenly adjusted its attack mode after being hit by 2 heavy impact bullets. It spat out a mouthful of old phlegm that it had been preparing for a long time. Lava bomb. Unlike the fireballs spat out by ordinary blaze shadow beasts, the lava bomb spat out by the Tribulation General's head was obviously more powerful. In the face of the lava bomb wrapped in blazing flames, several pygmy investigators decisively chose to retreat. Potter threw out an illusion of delayed casting to block the enemy, and then immediately ordered his men, "Get in the car and retreat. Call the mechanical chocobo cavalry and steam tanks for support. This is not an ordinary monster. It may be the Tribulation General." There was no doubt that as a spellcaster, he was aware of the attack's energy level when the hound tamer spat out the lava bomb. In all fairness, Potter did not expect the monsters here to be so powerful. It shouldn't be the humans of Soft Maple City. After all, the Tribulation General has never cooperated with the Ramsey people. Since ancient times, they have only enslaved ordinary people. As early as in Soft Maple City, the pygmy illusion mage had secretly checked the mayor and found that the mayor was not under the spell's control. Now, the possibility of them lying about the military intelligence and mistaking the gathered monsters for the generals and emperors was ruled out. Then, there was only one reasonable explanation left. The emperor has been awakened by the tribulation. Darport shouted this sentence through the walkie-talkie as soon as he got in the car. "We asked for support," he concisely stated his needs, and then gave his own speculation. For some reason, the Emperor did not appear, but Tribulation General did run out. I suggest that the steam tanks and mechanical chocobo cavalry try to wipe out the monsters in this area. Check if the Emperor has yet to fully recover his strength. "Roger that," the walkie-talkie replied. "Take the investigators to the designated evacuation point. The icebreaker is also approaching that position. The cavalry and tanks are ready to be deployed. They will be there to support you." Therefore, the investigation team decisively changed direction and drove around the mountain road to the base of the protrusion. As they traveled on the ice, their vehicle turned into an ice sleigh. "There's movement at the protrusion." Standing at the top of the mast, Brock wrapped himself in a cotton-padded jacket. The desert elf was somewhat unaccustomed to the cold weather. The pygmy icebreaker is also moving. In fact, after the pygmies began to move, the Leviathan quickly pulled out its anchor and followed. As the icebreaker cleared the sea ice, the Leviathan sailed smoothly and soon approached the pygmies' icebreaker. "Warning, the rear ship is close to the alert distance," the loudspeaker on the icebreaker sounded. "If you cross the safe distance, we will take the initiative to attack you. This is the first and last warning. Next time, we will directly open fire." Hearing the word, "open fire," the crew on the Leviathan could not help but grin. They knew how fierce the firepower of the behemoth under their feet was. If it was a competition of opening fire, it was not afraid of anyone. However, Keyes had his own plan. Now was not a good time to declare a full-scale war with the Pygmy Island. Therefore, after receiving the dwarves' warning, the Leviathan did not stop, but it did slow down its sailing speed. It maintained a relatively suitable distance from the icebreaker and did not cross the red line. "Signal them." Standing at the bow of the ship and staring at the pygmy icebreaker in the distance, Keyes used his psionic power to communicate with Brock, who was standing at the top of the mast. Say that we hope to provide help and request a meeting with them. Thanks to the field trip in the world of Ramsay, Keyes' subordinates, like the desert elves, learned to communicate using flag symbols from the looted Chamber of Commerce gold ship. He quickly conveyed the young Blue Dragon's message. We don't need help. Your request for a meeting is being evaluated. Do not continue to approach. It is recommended to stop the ship immediately. The loudspeaker on the icebreaker sounded again. Obviously, they had seen Brock's signal. After waiting for a while, without waiting for the pygmy's next notification, the semi-living Leviathan conveyed a message to Keyes. An unknown object is approaching. It is suspected to be a pygmy diving vehicle. Should we sink it? After receiving a negative answer, the Leviathan no longer paid attention to the little thing that suddenly appeared. Keyes was waiting for the other party to surface. A scallop-shaped submarine entered the water from the bottom of the icebreaker. Driven by a turbine, it sneaked all the way to the Leviathan. It first wandered around the bottom of the ship and carried out a reconnaissance. Then, it floated out of the sea at the stern of the ship. This was for safety. Generally speaking, the firepower of a ship was mostly on the sides and bow, and the stern usually did not have much firepower configuration. The pygmies drove the shell-shaped submarine to the surface and notified the Leviathan. Our meeting personnel have arrived. Please cooperate with them to board the ship. The shell opened a gap and a loudspeaker poked out. The sound attracted the attention of the sailors, and they immediately ran to the stern with their weapons. Don't attack. Put down the suspension ladder and let their people climb up the stern, Keyes' voice sounded in everyone's mind. Chapter 686. The air quality on this ship is good, it's very clean. The representative who came for the meeting closed the box of smelling salts he had prepared, and said to Keyes, who was standing in front of him. He was the captain of the dwarf icebreaker. Out of curiosity, he wanted to see the giant Leviathan ship in person. Your ship is not bad, although it's still not as good as ours. Was it modified by the dwarf island shipyard? The dwarf representative didn't realize that he had gone off topic at all. He immediately asked what he was interested in. We belong to the scale of perpetual order. For Ramsay, it's still a very young chamber of commerce. Keyes noticed the necklace hanging around the other's neck and said with a smile, however, our current goal is to deal with the Emperor, Madam, and the 10 generals of calamity. This is also the wish of many in our organization. They are very dangerous. Seeing that the lie detector didn't give him any feedback, the dwarf representative nodded. I believe what you said is true. He immediately changed the topic, but we really don't need help. At least from the current situation, our armed forces are enough to deal with any possible risk. Your rash participation is likely to destroy the stability of the war. Stability of the war? Keyes laughed in his heart. He didn't think so. Perhaps you are very confident in the technology you have mastered. However, the Emperor who has been awakened from the underground seal of Herones is not easy to deal with. We cannot interfere in your next battle. I only hope that the mechanical chocobo cavalry and steam tanks are strong enough. As he spoke, Keyes pointed at a team on the ice in the distance. They were meeting at the top of the ship's stern. The view was very good and they could see very far. Therefore, the actions of the dwarves could be seen clearly. The icebreaker was now anchored, and a large conveyor belt was added between its deck and the ice. The pygmy riders on the mechanical chocobos were put down one by one. About 200 riders formed a wedge formation. Then, with a rumbling sound, 3 steam tanks also landed on the ice through the conveyor belt. Based on the scale of the war in Ramsay, this was indeed a relatively powerful army. Not to mention the 3 steam tanks that could be considered mobile fortresses, just the mechanical chocobo cavalry alone was enough to make a human city's cavalry look down on them. Their riders, also known as the midget pilots, all stayed within the half-encirclement of the armored saddles. Swords and sabers alone could hardly pose a threat to them. The robotic chocobos they controlled were not only faster than horses, they also had sturdy metal beaks and sharp metal claws. In a direct confrontation, they could easily tear apart a human rider on horseback. Apart from that, the midget riders were also armed with firearms. They didn't even need to rush in front of the enemy to shoot out a torrential rain of death. Judging from the blaze shadow beasts and raven men that appeared earlier, even the monsters created by the Emperor would not be able to withstand a single blow from the mechanical chocobo cavalry. They would not be able to withstand the barrage of firearms. Beep 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 beep. From the saddle of each chocobo, a voice code indicating the charge command sounded. The sharp electronic sound pierced through the mechanical noise and reached the ears of every midget rider. They immediately gripped the steering wheel and pushed down the lever. Clatter clatter, clatter clatter, clatter clatter. The anti-skid pads on the feet of the robotic chocobos made contact with the ice, making a strange stomping sound. They formed a wedge-shaped formation, each rider maintaining an almost equal distance from each other as they sped across the ice. These riders were faster than the steam tanks, so they had to first meet up with the midget investigation team and protect their compatriots. Then, they would consider how to coordinate with the steam tanks to push forward and destroy all the monsters. Because the protrusion was not far from Maple City, and because the robotic chocobos were moving at full speed, they quickly saw the investigation team members who were also moving at lightning speed. The midget cavalry showed that they were well trained. They quickly split into two groups and let the ice sleds that Darapotter and the rest were on pass before the formation closed up again. The one who chased after the midget investigation team was the dog trainer, and he had a few dozen blazing shade beasts behind him. Seeing the cavalry appear in front of him, the general immediately stood up. His body suddenly transformed into a strong human form, and a whip appeared in his hand. He smashed the whip in his hand heavily on the ice, making a crisp paw sound. Ice shards shot out wantonly. All the blazing shade beasts stopped in their tracks at the same time. They understood the command in the crack of the whip and quickly formed a loose formation. When facing a charging cavalry, it was never wrong to stand in a loose formation. Seeing this, the leader of the pygmy cavalry could not help but laugh out loud. "Let them see how our mechanical chocobo cavalry charges." His words were transmitted to the ears of every pygmy cavalry through the communicator. As the riders adjusted the steering wheel, the original wedge-shaped formation instantly changed, turning into a long snake with a slight arc. They aimed their guns at the blazing shade beasts, and pulled the trigger as they controlled the robotic chocobos to move forward slowly. Unlike the guns in the hands of the shield and spear warriors, because the mechanical chocobo had an additional support structure, the guns of the riders were all large-caliber weapons. Every time a bullet was fired, the sound of a hammer hitting an anvil would be heard. When these bullets hit the blazing shade beasts, a large chunk of flesh was shaved off with each hit. Although the monsters dodged quickly, as the robotic chocobos approached step by step, more than a dozen monsters were shot in the head. The dog tamer did not seem to be able to do anything about it. The Calamity General had thicker skin. When the bullets hit the lava armor on his body, the most they could do was to shatter some fragments. Or it could be said that he was more agile. It was difficult for the pygmy riders to aim their guns at his body that was constantly circling around. However, this was actually just one of his schemes. After the robotic chocobos took more than 30 steps, the thick ice beneath their feet suddenly shattered into pieces. Tentacles covered in scales reached out from the holes in the ice and wrapped around the midget cavalry and their mounts, dragging them down the ice. The engines of the robotic chocobos were instantly extinguished by the seawater, and all the midget riders were trapped in their saddles. Gurgle gurgle. The holes in the ice kept bubbling, as if they were telling the story of what happened under the water. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Nights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.